Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October. I'd been Officer Thaddeus Brennan with the Millbrook Police Department for 8 years at that point, and I thought I'd seen everything a small town of 4,200 people could throw at me. Domestic disputes, drunk, and disorderlies, the occasional meth lab bust in the trailer park on the outskirts of town. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I walked into that night at 1847 Sycamore Lane. Dispatch crackled through my radio as I was finishing up paperwork from a minor fender bender earlier that evening. Unit 23. We've got a noise complaint at 1847 Sycamore. Neighbor reports loud banging and what sounds like screaming. Complainant is a Miss Magnolia Whitmore, lives next door at 1845. I knew the street well. It was in the older part of town, where the houses were built in the 1920s, and most of the residents were either elderly folks who'd lived there their whole lives, or young families just starting out, attracted by the relatively cheap rent. The houses were close together, separated by narrow driveways and patches of yellowing grass. Unit 23 responding, I said into the radio, already heading for my patrol car. The October air had that sharp bite to it that meant winter was coming early this year. Dead leaves crunched under my boots as I walked to the cruiser, and somewhere in the distance a dog was barking incessantly. The drive to Sycamore Lane took less than 5 minutes. Millbrook wasn't big enough for anything to take longer than that. As I turned onto the street, my headlights swept across neat rows of small, 2-story houses with peaked roofs and narrow front porches. Most were dark at this hour, porch lights creating small pools of amber light that didn't quite reach the street. I pulled up in front of 1847 and killed the engine. The house looked like every other one on the block. White vinyl siding that needed a good power wash, black shutters, and a front door that had probably been red once, but had faded to a rusty brown. The windows were all dark, heavy curtains drawn tight. No car in the driveway, but there was a detached garage at the back of the property. Before I could even get out of the cruiser, I saw movement from the house next door. Miss Magnolia Whitmore was already coming down her front steps, wrapped in a quilted housecoat with her gray hair in curlers. She moved faster than you'd expect for a woman who had to be pushing 70. "Officer Thaddeus, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached my window. I'd dealt with Magnolia before. She called in complaints about once a month, usually about teenagers playing their music too loud or cars speeding down the street. But I'd never seen her this agitated. "Evening, Ms. Whitmore," I said, stepping out of the cruiser. "You called about a noise complaint?" She nodded vigorously, clutching her housecoat tighter around her thin frame. "It's Mr. Beauregard next door. I've lived beside him for near 20 years, and I've never heard anything like this. Started about an hour ago, this awful banging, like someone's throwing furniture around, and the screaming." She shuddered. "It don't sound right, officer. Don't sound human." I glanced at the dark house. Everything looked quiet now. "Is Mr. Beauregard living alone? Any family members who might be visiting?" "His wife passed 2 winters ago," Magnolia said. "Cancer. Since then, it's just been him. Beauregard Clemens is his full name. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always been a quiet man." Works at the hardware store downtown, or at least he did. Haven't seen him go to work in maybe 2 weeks now. That detail made me pause. In a town like Millbrook, people noticed when routines changed. If Beauregard hadn't been going to work, something was definitely off. And you said the noises started an hour ago? Thereabouts. I was watching my shows when I heard this crash like glass breaking. Then the banging started. Rhythmic like, you know? Bang, 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 always in threes. And between the banging, I swear I could hear someone crying or wailing, but muffled, like it was coming from deep inside the house. I made a note in my small notebook. Have you seen Mr. Beauregard recently? Magnolia thought for a moment. Come to think of it, no. Not for maybe 4 or 5 days. His mail's been piling up too. I can see it from my kitchen window. The mailbox is so full the door won't close proper. All right, Ms. Whitmore. I want you to go back inside and lock your door. I'm going to check on Mr. Beauregard. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. Officer, I know I call you folks a lot, and maybe sometimes it's nothing. But this is different. There's something wrong in that house. I can feel it in my bones. I gently removed her hand. I'll be careful, ma'am. Please, go inside. I waited until she was back in her house, before approaching 1847. The front porch creaked under my weight, the wood soft with rot in places. The screen door hung slightly askew, and through it, I could see the main door was solid wood, painted that same faded red-brown. I knocked firmly. Mr. Beauregard Clemens? This is Officer Thaddeus Brennan with the Millbrook Police Department. I need you to come to the door, sir. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. Mr. Clemens, I've received a complaint about noise from your residence. I need to speak with you. That's when I heard it. A sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was like breathing, but wrong somehow. Too wet, too labored, like someone trying to breathe through liquid. And it was coming from directly behind the door. Mr. Clemens, are you all right in there? If you're injured or need medical assistance, I need you to let me know. The breathing got louder, and then I heard what Magnolia must have meant. It wasn't quite screaming, wasn't quite crying. It was something in between, a keening sound that didn't seem like it could come from a human throat. But underneath it, barely audible, I could hear a voice, raspy and broken. Help. Me. That was all I needed. I tried the doorknob, locked. I took a step back and announced, Mr. Clemens, I'm coming in to check on your welfare. Then I drove my shoulder into the door. The frame was old and weak, and it gave way on the second hit, the door swinging inward into darkness. The smell hit me immediately, a combination of rotting food, human waste, and something else, something metallic and sharp that made my stomach turn. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a living room that looked like a tornado had gone through it. Furniture was overturned, the couch cushions slashed open with stuffing scattered everywhere. The walls were covered in what looked like scratches, long gouges in the drywall that went from floor to ceiling. And on every surface, the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, were handprints. Bloody handprints, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, overlapping and smeared like someone had been crawling around the room, feeling their way in the dark. Mr. Clemens? I called out, my hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. Sir, I need you to identify yourself and your location. The breathing sound came again, louder now, from somewhere deeper in the house. I moved carefully through the destroyed living room, glass crunching under my boots from what used to be a television screen. The kitchen was to my left, and I could see more destruction. Cabinets hanging open, dishes shattered on the floor, the refrigerator door standing wide with spoiled food spilling out onto the linoleum. But it was what I saw on the kitchen table that made me stop cold. There were photographs spread out across the surface, dozens of them. Old photos, new photos, some that looked like they'd been taken with a Polaroid camera. They were all of the same woman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair. In some, she was smiling at the camera. In others, she was sleeping. But in the most recent ones, the ones that looked freshly developed, she was clearly dead. Her eyes were closed, her skin waxy and pale, and she was laid out in what looked like a basement or cellar. I picked up one of the photos with a trembling hand. On the back, in shaky handwriting, someone had written, "Margaret, day 12, she's getting better." Margaret. That must have been Beauregard's wife, the one Magnolia said had died 2 years ago from cancer. But these photos... A crash from upstairs made me jump. Then came that sound again. Bang, bang, bang. Exactly as Magnolia had described. 3 rhythmic hits, like someone pounding on a door or wall. I drew my weapon and moved toward the stairs. They were narrow and steep, typical of these old houses, and each step groaned under my weight. The banging continued, getting louder as I climbed. At the top of the stairs was a narrow hallway with 3 doors, 2 open, 1 closed. The closed door was where the banging was coming from. "Mr. Clemens, I'm Officer Brennan. I'm armed. I need you to step away from the door and identify yourself." The banging stopped. Then, in a voice that sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass, I heard, "She's cold. She's so cold. I need to warm her up." "Sir, I need you to open the door, slowly." Can't leave her. She needs me. Been trying to warm her up, but she won't wake up." My mind was racing. If Beauregard's wife had died 2 years ago, who was he talking about? I thought about those photos downstairs, particularly the recent ones. A horrible suspicion was forming in my mind. "Mr. Clemens, I'm going to open this door. I need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them." I tried the handle, locked from the inside. The door was older than the front door, solid wood, with an old-fashioned keyhole lock. I could probably kick it in, but I didn't know what was on the other side or what state Beauregard was in. "Beauregard, listen to me. I want to help you. I want to help Margaret. But you need to unlock this door." There was a long pause. Then I heard shuffling footsteps. The lock clicked, and the door swung open slowly. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw in that room. Beauregard Clemens stood in the doorway, and I barely recognized him as human. He was skeletal thin, his clothes hanging off him in tatters. His hair was long and matted, his beard wild and unkempt. His fingernails had grown long and were caked with what looked like dried blood and dirt. But it was his eyes that were the worst, wide and unfocused, with the kind of 1,000-yard stare I'd only seen in war veterans having flashbacks. "She's cold," he said again, stepping aside to let me see into the room. The master bedroom had been transformed into something out of a nightmare. The windows were covered with thick blankets nailed to the walls. Candles were everywhere, on the dresser, the nightstands, the floor, dozens of them, all burned down to various heights. The heat in the room was oppressive, had to be over 90 degrees. And on the bed, wrapped in what must have been every blanket in the house, was a form. A human form. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, then immediately called for backup and an ambulance on my radio. Beauregard moved toward the bed, and I had to physically restrain him. "No, sir." Step back now." "But she needs me. She's cold. I've been trying to warm her up, but nothing works. The furnace broke and I tried to fix it, but then I thought maybe candles would be better. more natural heat, you know? Like when we went camping when we were young. She always loved camping. As my backup arrived, all 2 officers that were on duty that night, and the paramedics rushed in, the full story began to emerge. Beauregard's wife, Margaret, had indeed died of cancer 2 years ago. She'd been cremated, her ashes scattered at the lake where they'd honeymooned. But Beauregard had never accepted it. According to what we later pieced together from his ramblings and the evidence in the house, he'd been visiting the cemetery regularly, convinced that Margaret was just sleeping, that she'd been buried alive somehow despite being cremated. About 3 weeks before that night, something in his mind had finally snapped completely. He'd gone to the cemetery with a shovel, but instead of finding his wife's grave, which didn't exist, he'd dug up someone else. A woman named Dorothy Hutchins, who'd been buried just a week earlier. In his broken mind, he'd convinced himself that this was Margaret, that she'd been cold in the ground and needed to be warmed up to wake up again. He'd brought Dorothy Hutchins' body back to his house in the middle of the night, convinced she was his wife who just needed to be warmed up to come back to life. For 3 weeks he'd been keeping her corpse in his bedroom, surrounded by candles, piling blankets on top of her, talking to her, trying to feed her. The banging sounds Magnolia had heard were him pounding on the walls in frustration when she wouldn't respond, wouldn't wake up, wouldn't eat the soup he'd tried to spoon into her decaying mouth. The paramedics couldn't do anything for Dorothy Hutchins, of course. She'd been dead for nearly a month at that point. They sedated Beauregard, who fought them every step of the way, screaming about how they were letting Margaret get cold again, how she needed him. It took all 3 of us officers to hold him down while they administered the sedative. As they wheeled him out on a gurney, he looked at me with those hollow eyes and said something I'll never forget. She spoke to me yesterday. She said she was getting warmer. She said she'd wake up soon if I just kept trying. The thing is, Dorothy Hutchins had been dead for weeks. There was no way she could have spoken to anyone. But the conviction in Beauregard's voice, the absolute certainty that he'd heard his wife's voice coming from that corpse, it chilled me to the bone. We had to call in the state police to help process the scene. It was beyond anything our small department could handle. The photographs alone took hours to catalog. There were hundreds of them, documenting Beauregard's descent into madness. The early ones showed him at Margaret's grave marker at the crematorium, then visiting other graves, seemingly searching for something. Then came photos of Dorothy Hutchins' grave, first intact, then disturbed, then fully excavated. But it was the basement that revealed the full extent of Beauregard's break from reality. I found the door to the basement behind the kitchen, painted the same off-white as the walls so it almost blended in. The smell coming from below was different from the rest of the house, earthier with a chemical undertone that made my nose burn. The wooden stairs were slick with something I didn't want to identify. My flashlight beam swept across a space that had been transformed into some kind of makeshift laboratory or workshop. There were books everywhere. Medical texts, anatomy guides, books on Egyptian mummification, Victorian death practices, even what looked like occult texts about resurrection and bringing back the dead. On a workbench along one wall were jars filled with various liquids and what looked like organs, though whether they were human or animal, I couldn't tell and didn't want to know. There were syringes, tubing, pumps, and other medical equipment that looked like it had been stolen from a hospital or medical supply company. Later, investigation confirmed that several break-ins at the local hospital's storage facility over the past month had been Beauregard's doing. A notebook lay open on the bench, filled with his increasingly erratic handwriting. The entries started 3 weeks ago, right around the time he dug up Dorothy Hutchins. Day 1, retrieved Margaret from the cold ground. She's in a deep sleep, deeper than before. Body temperature 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Need to warm gradually to avoid shock. Day 3, no change. Tried heating blankets. Margaret's skin showing some discoloration, probably from the cold soil. Applied lotions and oils. Day 5, Margaret spoke. Just a whisper, but I heard her say my name. The warming is working. Increased room temperature to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Day 8, injection of formaldehyde seems to have helped with the skin degradation. Margaret is looking more like herself. Still won't eat. Maybe her throat is too dry. Day 11, the smell is getting stronger. Neighbors might notice. Bought more candles. The vanilla scent helps. Margaret opened her eyes today for just a moment. They looked different, clouded, but it was definitely her looking at me. Day 14, fed Margaret soup through a tube today. Most came back up, but some stayed down. Progress. She's trying so hard to come back to me. I can feel it. Day 17, Margaret is moving. Just small twitches, but movement. The books were right. Death is just another state of being, one that can be reversed with proper care. The Egyptians knew this. We've just forgotten. Day 19, something's wrong. Margaret won't stop crying. It's a low, constant moan. I think she's in pain. Increased the morphine dose. Borrowed from hospital. Need to make her comfortable. Day 21. They're coming. I can feel it. Someone knows. But I can't let them take her. Not when we're so close. She spoke today, full sentences. She said she loves me. She said she's cold, always cold. I've failed her. Need more heat, more candles, more time. The entries became increasingly illegible after that, descending into rambling paragraphs about ancient resurrection practices, body temperature calculations, and fevered declarations of love for Margaret. But there was something else in the basement that made my blood run cold. In the corner, covered by a tarp, was a second body. This one was male, elderly, and had been dead for maybe a week based on the decomposition. We later identified him as Harold Fitzgerald, a widower who'd lived alone on the other side of town. He'd been reported missing 5 days earlier. According to Beauregard's notes, he'd decided that Margaret was lonely, that she needed company while she recovered. So he'd found Harold, whose wife had died the previous year, thinking they could be friends in their healing process. Harold had been strangled. The ligature marks on his neck were clear even through the decomposition. In Beauregard's twisted mind, he was helping Harold reunite with his wife in some kind of suspended state between life and death. The state police detective, a seasoned officer named Ramirez, who'd driven down from the Capitol, stood next to me in that basement, both of us trying to process what we were seeing. 23 years on the force, he said quietly, and I've never seen anything like this. This isn't just murder or grave robbing. This is, I don't even know what to call it. Madness, I said. Pure madness. We found more evidence throughout the house over the next several hours. Beauregard had been planning this for months, maybe even since his wife had died 2 years ago. There were journals dating back to right after her death, filled with his inability to accept that she was gone. He'd started with denial, then moved to bargaining with God, then to researching everything he could about death and resurrection. The breaking point seemed to have come when he'd lost his job at the hardware store 6 weeks earlier. Without that routine, that connection to normalcy, he'd spiraled completely. His journals from that period were almost unreadable, filled with elaborate diagrams of the human body, calculations about soul weight he'd apparently read about the 21 grams, experiment, and increasingly desperate plans to bring Margaret back. What struck me most was how methodical he'd been in his madness. This wasn't a crime of passion or a sudden psychotic break. This was planned, researched, and executed with a twisted kind of logic that made sense only in his fractured mind. We found receipts for everything: the medical equipment, the formaldehyde, the morphine he'd stolen. He'd actually left IOUs at the hospital, promising to pay them back once Margaret was better. He'd kept detailed records of Dorothy Hutchins' treatment, documenting every injection, every temperature change, every moment he thought he saw signs of life returning. The photographs were the worst part. Not just the ones on the kitchen table, but albums and albums of them throughout the house. Pictures of Margaret when she was alive, healthy and smiling. Pictures of her during her cancer treatment, growing thinner and paler. Pictures of her in the hospital near the end. And then the pictures after. Pictures of an empty coffin. He'd apparently broken into the funeral home before the cremation. Pictures of other people's graves. And finally, those horrible pictures of Dorothy Hutchins' corpse positioned in various poses, dressed in Margaret's clothes, surrounded by Margaret's things. As we were processing the scene, Magnolia knocked on the door. She'd been watching from her window all night, and now, as dawn broke over Millbrook, she stood on the porch with a pot of coffee and a plate of sandwiches for the officers. "I knew something was wrong," she said, her hands shaking as she poured coffee into paper cups she'd brought. "But I never imagined... Is it true what they're saying? That he dug someone up?" I couldn't give her details, but I nodded. "Mr. Clemens is very sick, Ms. Whitmore. He's getting help now." "And the other person? The one in the bedroom?" "I can't discuss that, ma'am." "But you did the right thing calling us." She looked at the house, then back at me. "You know, Beauregard was such a good man before Margaret died. They were so in love, even after 40 years of marriage. He'd bring her flowers every Friday without fail. When she got sick, he took early retirement to care for her. Spent every moment by her side." "Sometimes love can make people do terrible things," I said. "No," Magnolia said firmly. "Love doesn't do this. Grief does. Grief that's been left to fester and rot, just like..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. She was right, of course. What we'd found in that house wasn't about love. It was about an inability to let go. About grief so profound it had warped reality itself in Beauregard's mind. The Hutchins family had to be notified, which fell to me as the first responding officer. I've had to deliver death notifications before, but this was different. How do you tell someone that their loved one's body has been stolen and kept in a madman's bedroom for 3 weeks? How do you explain that level of desecration? Dorothy's daughter, Patricia, lived 2 towns over. She was a school teacher, married with 2 kids. When I knocked on her door at 7 a.m., she knew immediately something was wrong. Police don't make social calls at that hour. "Is it about Mom?" she asked, which confused me at first since her mother had been dead for a month. It turned out that Patricia had been having nightmares for the past 3 weeks, dreams where her mother was calling for help, saying she was cold and couldn't breathe. She'd even gone to the cemetery twice to check on the grave, finding it undisturbed both times. Beauregard had been very careful to make it look normal from above after he'd dug down from the side. "I know this sounds crazy," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. But I felt like something was wrong. Like Mom wasn't at peace. I didn't tell her about Beauregard's journal entries claiming Dorothy had spoken to him. Some things are better left unsaid. The story made national news, of course. Small-town horror. Man keeps corpse in bedroom, believes it's his dead wife. The media descended on Millbrook like vultures, interviewing anyone who would talk. Most people refused, closing ranks the way small towns do when faced with outside scrutiny. But some talked. Beauregard's co-workers at the hardware store described how he'd gradually become more erratic after Margaret's death, talking to himself, claiming he'd seen her in the aisles. Customers reported that he'd sometimes forget where he was, calling out for Margaret in the middle of helping someone find the right screws or paint. The hospital administration had to answer questions about how someone could steal medical equipment and drugs without being caught. It turned out Beauregard had worked there briefly as a janitor 15 years earlier and still remembered the layout, the shift changes, the security weak points. The psychological evaluation of Beauregard Clemens became a case study that would be discussed in psychiatric journals for years to come. Dr. Helena Morrison, the state-appointed psychiatrist who examined him, later told me it was the most severe case of complicated grief disorder she'd ever encountered, combined with what she called Cotard's delusion in reverse. Cotard's delusion is when someone believes they themselves are dead, she explained during the trial preparation. But Beauregard had developed the opposite, an absolute inability to accept that someone else was dead. His mind had created an elaborate framework where death was just a reversible state, like sleep or coma. Beauregard was being held at the state psychiatric facility, and I had to visit him several times for follow-up questions and court preparation. Each visit was more disturbing than the last. The first time, about a week after the arrest, he was still in acute psychosis. He didn't recognize me, kept calling me by his brother's name. His brother had died in Vietnam, we later learned, and insisted that I help him file a missing persons report for Margaret. He claimed the people at the hospital had stolen her while he was sleeping. They took her because she was getting better, he said, gripping my hands across the metal table in the interview room. His fingers were ice cold, his nails still dirty despite the hospital's attempts to clean him up. She was talking, officer. She was coming back to me, and they couldn't stand it. They don't want people to know that death can be reversed. The second visit, 2 weeks later, the antipsychotic medications had started to work, but in some ways that made things worse. The fog of delusion was lifting, and glimpses of reality were breaking through. He knew something terrible had happened, but couldn't quite grasp what. "I had Margaret with me, didn't I?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "But that's impossible." "Margaret died. I remember the funeral. I remember scattering her ashes at Lake Morrison. So who was in my house?" When I told him about Dorothy Hutchins, he broke down completely. Not crying. It was something deeper, more primal. A keening sound that made the guards rush in, thinking he was having a medical emergency. It was the sound of a mind finally, truly breaking under the weight of what it had done. But it was Harold Fitzgerald's murder that would ensure Beauregard never walked free again. While the grave robbing and abuse of a corpse were serious crimes, the intentional killing of Harold was first-degree murder. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Jessica Thornton, built her case methodically. The trial was moved to the state capitol due to the media attention. The courtroom was packed every day, half with reporters and half with locals from Millbrook who'd made the 2-hour drive to watch justice being served. Magnolia Whitmore was there every day, always in the same seat in the third row, her hands folded in her lap, watching everything with those sharp blue eyes. My testimony took 2 full days. The prosecutor walked me through every detail of that night, the call, the arrival at the scene, the discovery of the bodies. The defense attorney, a public defender named Marcus Boyd, who'd drawn the short straw on this case, tried to establish that Beauregard was insane at the time of the crimes. "Officer Thaddeus," Boyd said during cross-examination, "in your professional opinion, was Mr. Clemens aware of what he was doing when you encountered him that night?" "He was aware of his actions," I replied carefully. "He had taken deliberate steps to secure the bodies, to maintain them, to hide his activities." "That shows awareness." But did he understand that Dorothy Hutchins was not his wife? Did he understand that she was actually dead? I thought about those journal entries, the careful documentation, the methodical planning. I believe he understood on some level, sir. The fact that he had to dig up a body, that he had to hide his activities, suggests he knew what he was doing was wrong. The defense's own psychiatric expert testified that Beauregard was suffering from severe psychosis, that he genuinely believed he was caring for his wife. But the prosecution countered with evidence of planning and premeditation. The break-ins at the hospital, the careful selection of Dorothy Hutchins because she physically resembled Margaret, the murder of Harold Fitzgerald. Patricia Hutchins gave victim impact testimony that left half the courtroom in tears. She talked about her mother's peaceful death after a long illness, how the family had found comfort knowing she was at rest, only to have that peace shattered by Beauregard's actions. "My children keep asking if Grandma is okay now," she said, her voice breaking. "How do I explain to a 7-year-old that someone took Grandma's body? How do I make them feel safe when such evil exists in the world?" Harold Fitzgerald's son, Thomas, flew in from Oregon to testify he was a quiet man, an accountant who looked nothing like his father except for the same gentle eyes. He talked about how his father had just been starting to heal from his wife's death, how he'd been planning to visit his grandchildren for Christmas. "Dad died alone and afraid," Thomas said, staring directly at Beauregard, not from illness or age, but because someone decided he should die. There's no sense in it. No reason that makes it comprehensible. Beauregard himself never testified. His lawyers advised against it, and honestly, I don't think he was capable. By the time of the trial, 3 months after that night on Sycamore Lane, he was a shell of a person. The medications kept him stable but flat, like all the life had been drained out of him. He sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, staring at nothing, occasionally mumbling to himself. Only once during the trial did he show any emotion. It was when the prosecution showed a photograph of Margaret, his actual wife, from when she was alive and healthy. Beauregard looked at it and started to cry. Not the wild keening from the psychiatric hospital, but quiet, normal tears. For just a moment he seemed like a regular person grieving a terrible loss. Then the moment passed, and he went back to that 1,000-yard stare. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder for Harold Fitzgerald, abuse of a corpse for Dorothy Hutchins, breaking and entering, theft of medical supplies, and a dozen other charges. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, with the judge recommending he serve his time in a secure psychiatric facility rather than a regular prison. After the verdict, I walked out of the courthouse to find Magnolia Whitmore waiting by my patrol car. "I wanted to thank you, Officer Thaddeus," she said, "for taking my call seriously that night. For doing your job. Just doing my duty, ma'am." She shook her head. "No, it was more than that. You treated him with dignity even after seeing what he'd done. You didn't brutalize him or hurt him. Even though you had every reason to be disgusted, that matters." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I've been thinking about moving. Can't look at that house next door without remembering. But then I think someone needs to remember. Someone needs to witness what grief can do when it goes untended." She was right about that. The house at 1847 Sycamore Lane stood empty for 2 years before it was finally demolished. The lot remains vacant to this day, a gap in the row of houses like a missing tooth. Kids say it's haunted, that you can sometimes hear crying coming from where the house used to be. But I know better. There's nothing supernatural about what happened there. It was entirely, horribly human. The case changed me as a police officer. I'd always thought the worst calls would be the violent ones. The bar fights, the domestic disputes, the drug deals gone wrong. But this taught me that the most disturbing cases are the ones where love goes wrong, where grief becomes madness, where the human mind breaks in ways you never thought possible. I started paying more attention to the welfare checks after that. Started really looking at people when I talked to them, watching for signs of that kind of deep, untreated grief. I pushed the department to partner with mental health services, to get crisis counselors involved earlier. We couldn't save Beauregard Clemens, Dorothy Hutchins, or Harold Fitzgerald, but maybe we could prevent the next tragedy. About a year after the trial, I got a letter forwarded from the state psychiatric facility. It was from Beauregard, written in shaky handwriting on yellow legal paper. It read, "Officer Thaddeus, the doctors tell me I did terrible things. I remember some of it now, like a nightmare I can't wake up from. I remember Margaret dying. I remember the emptiness after. I remember thinking I could fix it, that death was just another problem to solve. I want you to know I'm sorry, not just legally sorry, but truly sorry. I took that woman from her rest. I took that man from his life. I became something Margaret would have been horrified by. Sometimes I still hear her voice, but now I know it's not real. The medications help with that, but I miss the delusion sometimes. Is that wrong? To miss being crazy because at least then I believed she was still with me? Thank you for stopping me. Thank you for not letting me hurt anyone else." Beauregard Clemens, I never wrote back. What would I say? That I understood? I didn't. That I forgave him. That wasn't my forgiveness to give. That it would get better. We both knew that was a lie. 3 years later, I heard that Beauregard had died in the psychiatric facility. Heart attack in his sleep. He was buried in a potter's field with no ceremony, no family present. Magnolia Whitmore, who had moved to Florida by then, sent flowers. She was the only one who did. The case file for that night sits in the department archives now. Dozens of boxes of evidence, photographs, and testimony. Every few years, a true crime podcast or documentary filmmaker comes asking about it. I always decline to participate. Some stories don't need to be entertainment. Some horrors should stay buried in the past. But late at night, when I'm on patrol and pass by that empty lot on Sycamore Lane, I still think about it. About how thin the line is between love and obsession, between grief and madness. About how a noise complaint call turned into one of the most disturbing cases in the state's history. The new officers, the rookies who've heard about the case but weren't there, sometimes ask me about it. They want to know what it was like, finding those bodies, seeing that level of delusion firsthand. I tell them the same thing every time. Pray you never have a call like that. And if you do, remember that even the worst monsters were once just people who lost their way. But there's one detail I've never told anyone. Not even in my official reports. When we were processing the scene, when I was in that overheated bedroom with all those candles, I could have sworn I heard something. Just for a moment, so quiet I thought I'd imagined it. A woman's voice, thin and distant, saying, "Help me." It was probably just the wind through the old house's cracks, or my mind playing tricks after the stress of the scene. But sometimes in my dreams, I still hear it. And in those dreams, I can never tell if it's Margaret calling out from beyond, Dorothy crying for peace, or just the echo of Beauregard's broken mind, still trying to bring back the dead. The truth is, some cases never really close. They stay with you, filed away in the back of your mind, surfacing at unexpected moments. A couple holding hands on the street makes you think of Beauregard and Margaret in better times. A funeral procession reminds you of Dorothy Hutchins, stolen from her rest. An elderly man walking alone brings Harold Fitzgerald to mind, his last moments of terror. That's the real horror of this job. Not the blood or the violence or even the death. It's seeing how easily love can turn to madness, how quickly a normal person can become something unrecognizable. It's knowing that somewhere out there, right now, another Beauregard is sitting alone in a house, listening to the voice of someone who isn't there, planning something terrible in the name of love. 5 years have passed since that night on Sycamore Lane. 5 years, and I still can't drive past that empty lot without feeling a chill run down my spine. But what happened last month made me realize the story wasn't really over. It never really is with cases like this. It started with another noise complaint of all things. Different address, 2214 Elm Street, on the other side of town. The caller was an elderly man named Mr. Peterson, who said his neighbor had been making strange noises all night. Banging, he said. Rhythmic banging, always in threes. My blood went cold when I heard that. I took the call myself, even though I was doing paperwork that night and could have sent one of the younger officers. Something told me I needed to handle this personally. The house on Elm Street was newer than the ones on Sycamore, a 1950s ranch style with aluminum siding and a neat lawn. Nothing about it screamed danger or madness, but I'd learned that the worst horrors often hide behind the most ordinary facades. The homeowner was a woman named Gladys Turner, 67 years old, retired nurse. When she answered the door, she looked perfectly normal. Gray hair in curlers, wearing a floral housecoat, bifocals perched on her nose, but her eyes had that same 1,000-yard stare I'd seen in Beauregard's. "Officer," she said pleasantly, as if she'd been expecting me. "Would you like some tea? I just made a fresh pot." "Ma'am, we've had a complaint about noise coming from your residence. Have you been doing any late-night repairs or moving furniture?" She tilted her head, considering. "Oh, that must be Harold. He gets restless at night sometimes. Would you like to meet him?" Harold. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Harold Fitzgerald had been the man Beauregard murdered. "Ma'am, who is Harold?" "My husband, of course. He's been poorly lately, but he's getting better, much better. Come in, come in." Every instinct told me not to go in alone, but I needed to know. I called for backup, telling them to arrive quietly, no sirens, then followed Gladys into her house. The inside was immaculate, obsessively clean. It smelled of potpourri and disinfectant, with an underlying scent of something medicinal. Photos covered every surface, all of the same man, a heavy-set fellow with kind eyes and a white beard. In some photos he was young, in others middle-aged, and in the most recent ones elderly and frail. Harold and I were married for 43 years, Gladys said, leading me down a hallway. "He passed last month, heart attack, but death isn't really the end, you know." Officer Brennan proved that. I stopped cold. "Officer Brennan? Do you mean Officer Thaddeus Brennan?" She turned to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Oh yes, you. You're the one who found Mr. Clemens. I've read all about it. Every article, every report I could get my hands on through the Freedom of Information Act. You see, Mr. Clemens was right about everything. He just went about it wrong. Ma'am, where is Harold? In our bedroom, of course. Where else would he be?" She opened the door to the master bedroom, and the smell hit me immediately. Formaldehyde, decay, and something else, something chemical and wrong. But the room was empty except for a perfectly made bed and more photos of Harold. "He's shy around strangers," Gladys said, walking to the closet. "Harold, dear, we have a visitor." She opened the closet door, and there he was. Harold Turner, dead for at least a month, propped up in the closet wearing a suit and tie. His skin was waxy and discolored, his eyes sewn open. His mouth twisted into what was supposed to be a smile, but looked more like a grimace. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Gladys had clearly learned from Beauregard's mistakes. Harold's body had been professionally embalmed. She'd been a nurse after all, and knew how to preserve tissue. She'd installed a complex system of pulleys and wires, like a marionette, that allowed her to make him move and wave. "Say hello to Officer Brennan, Harold," she said, pulling a string that made the corpse's arm rise in a grotesque parody of a wave. I immediately called for that backup to hurry and tried to keep Gladys calm and talking while we waited. "Mrs. Turner, how long has Harold been like this?" "Since the day after his funeral," she said proudly. "I couldn't let them bury him. Not when I knew there was another way. Mr. Clemens showed us the way, even if he failed in the execution. You see, he tried to warm the body from the outside, but warmth has to come from within. That's why I've been injecting Harold with heated fluids every 4 hours. It's keeping his organs from completely shutting down." "Ma'am, Harold is dead. What you're doing, this isn't bringing him back." Her face darkened. "That's what they said about Mr. Clemens, too. But I've made improvements. I've been giving Harold electrical stimulation therapy, small shocks to restart the nervous system. And look." She pulled another string, and Harold's mouth opened and closed like a ventriloquist's dummy. From somewhere in the closet, a small speaker played a recording of a man's voice saying, "I love you, Gladys. He talks to me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Every night he tells me he loves me." My backup arrived then, 2 officers who'd been on the force less than a year. They took one look at the scene and had to step outside. Can't say I blamed them. We arrested Gladys without incident. She went quietly, only asking if she could kiss Harold goodbye. I didn't let her. As the paramedics removed Harold's body, she called out to him, "Don't worry, dear. I'll be home soon. Keep taking your medicine." The investigation revealed that Gladys had been planning this since the day she'd read about Beauregard's case online. She'd seen him not as a cautionary tale, but as a pioneer who'd simply lacked the medical knowledge to succeed. She'd stolen embalming fluid from the funeral home where Harold was supposed to be buried, had taken his body from the coffin the night before the burial, replacing it with sandbags. She'd kept detailed notes just like Beauregard, but hers were more clinical, more precise. Temperature readings, chemical formulations, electrical voltage calculations. She'd even been corresponding with other people online who believed death could be reversed, sharing techniques and theories. There was a whole community of them, it turned out, inspired by Beauregard's case. The prosecutor, the same Jessica Thornton who'd handled Beauregard's case, looked exhausted when she met with me. "It's happening again," she said, "and it's going to keep happening. Beauregard opened a door that we can't close." She was right. In the months following Gladys Turner's arrest, 3 more similar cases were reported across the state. All elderly people who'd lost spouses, all inspired by what they called the Clemens method. The state had to form a task force specifically to deal with what they termed post-mortem delusion crimes. Gladys was found incompetent to stand trial and was sent to the same psychiatric facility where Beauregard had died. During her evaluation, she told the psychiatrist that she'd been visited by Beauregard's spirit, that he'd told her she was doing God's work. "Death is just a door," she said, "and we're learning how to unlock it." I visited Magnolia Whitmore in Florida after Gladys's arrest. She was living in a nice retirement community near Orlando, spending her days playing cards and swimming in the pool. But when I told her about Gladys Turner, about the copycat cases, she wasn't surprised. "Evil spreads, Officer Thaddeus," she said, sipping lemonade on her porch. "Like a disease. One person does something unthinkable, and it gives others permission to do the same. That's why I had to leave Millbrook. The shadow of what happened was growing longer, not shorter. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever wonder if Beauregard was onto something?" Not the grave robbing or the murder, God, no. But the idea that we don't really understand death, that maybe the line between life and death isn't as clear as we think? "No," I said firmly. "Death is death. Everything else is just people unable to accept reality." But even as I said it, I thought about that voice I'd heard in Beauregard's house. The woman's voice saying, "Help me." I'd never mentioned it to Magnolia, never told anyone. But sometimes, late at night, I wondered. The empty lot on Sycamore Lane has been sold now. A young couple from the city bought it, planning to build their dream home. They don't know the history, and the real estate agent didn't tell them. I thought about warning them, but what would I say? That the ground is cursed, that madness seeps into the soil. I drove by there yesterday. They've already broken ground, the foundation being poured. The construction workers were laughing, music playing from a radio. Life moving on, the way it always does. But I noticed something that made me pull over and look closer. In the freshly disturbed earth, there were flowers growing. Not planted flowers, wild flowers that had sprouted on their own. Purple foxgloves, which I remembered from my grandmother's warnings, were poisonous. They were growing in a perfect rectangle, exactly where Beauregard's bedroom had been. When I got home that night, there was a package waiting for me. No return address, but postmarked from the state psychiatric facility. Inside was a journal, leather-bound and water-stained. The first page had a note. Officer Brennan found this hidden in Gladys Turner's room after she passed. Thought you should have it. Dash Dr. Morrison. Gladys had died? I called the facility immediately. Heart attack, they said, just like Beauregard. Died in her sleep, peacefully. They'd found her in the morning, smiling. I opened the journal. It was Beauregard's, the one we'd never found during our investigation. The one where he'd first started planning everything. But the last entry was new, written in Gladys's shaky hand. He was right. Beauregard was right. I can see it now, as my own time approaches. Death isn't an ending. It's a transformation. The body fails, but something remains. Something that can be called back if you know how. If you're brave enough, if you love enough. Officer Brennan will read this. He's the keeper of our story now, whether he wants to be or not. He heard Margaret's voice that night. He knows the truth, even if he won't admit it. The work will continue. Others will take up where we failed. Each attempt brings us closer to the answer. One day, someone will succeed where Beauregard and I failed. Someone will bring back the dead. And on that day, Officer Brennan, you'll understand that we weren't crazy. We were just ahead of our time. Until we meet again, and we will meet again. Gladys Turner. I burned the journal that night, watched it turn to ash in my fireplace. But her words stayed with me. They always will. Because here's the thing I've never told anyone, the thing that keeps me awake at night. When we found Harold Fitzgerald's body in Beauregard's basement, the coroner said he'd been dead for about a week. But I could swear that when I first saw him under that tarp, I saw his chest move. Just once, just slightly, like he was taking a breath. It was probably a trick of the light, probably my exhausted mind playing games after the trauma of that night. Probably nothing. Probably. But sometimes when I'm alone on patrol, driving past the cemetery or responding to a welfare check on an elderly person who's lost their spouse, I think about Beauregard and Gladys. I think about their absolute conviction that death could be reversed. And I wonder, God help me, I wonder, What if they weren't completely wrong? What if they were just missing one crucial piece of the puzzle? I've put in for early retirement. 30 years on the force is enough. The chief thinks it's because of the accumulated stress of cases like Beauregard's, and he's not wrong. But it's more than that. It's the fear that one day I'll respond to another noise complaint, find another grieving spouse with a corpse in their bedroom, and instead of being horrified, I'll be curious. The young officers, they don't understand why cases like Beauregard's and Gladys's are different from regular homicides. They see it as just another category of crime: grave robbing, abuse of a corpse, murder. But they don't understand that these aren't crimes of violence or greed or passion. They're crimes of love. Twisted, deformed, monstrous love, but love nonetheless. And love, as I've learned, is the most dangerous force in the universe. As I write this, it's been exactly 1 week since they demolished the Turner house. Gladys had no family, so the property went to the state. They tore it down rather than try to sell it. Too much stigma, too much horror soaked into the walls. But yesterday, something strange happened. Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who'd called in the noise complaint about Gladys, called the station again. He said he was still hearing the banging from the Turner property. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. Even though the house was gone, nothing there but an empty lot. The officer who responded, one of those young kids who doesn't know the full story, told Mr. Peterson it was probably just the wind hitting the construction fence they'd put up. Mr. Peterson accepted that explanation. But I know better. I know that some things don't end just because we want them to. Some stories keep going, echoing through time, spreading like a virus from one broken mind to another. Somewhere out there, right now, someone is reading about Beauregard Clemens online. They're reading about Gladys Turner. They're looking at their dying spouse or recently deceased loved one and thinking, maybe, just maybe. And somewhere else, a phone is ringing at a police station. A dispatcher is taking notes about a noise complaint. Banging sounds, always in threes. A concerned neighbor. A welfare check needed. Some poor officer is about to walk into their own nightmare, their own confrontation with the impossible idea that love can conquer death, or die trying. My replacement starts next week. Young guy, eager, full of ideas about community policing and mental health intervention. I've tried to prepare him, tried to tell him about the kinds of calls that will stay with him forever. But how do you explain something like Beauregard Clemens? How do you warn someone about the Gladys Turners of the world? You can't. You just hope they're strong enough to face it when it comes. Strong enough to look madness in the eye and not blink. Strong enough to resist the terrible logic of grief. Strong enough to accept that sometimes dead is better. The night is falling now as I finish writing this. Somewhere in Millbrook, families are sitting down to dinner. Kids are doing homework. Couples are watching TV together. Normal life going on, the way it always does. But I know that in one of those houses, maybe on a quiet street like Sycamore or Elm, someone is sitting alone in the dark, listening to the voice of someone who isn't there anymore. And they're planning something. Something unthinkable. Something that will require another officer, another night, another knock on another door. 3 knocks, to be precise. Always 3. I've been Officer Bartholomew Ridge with the Cedarbrook Police Department for 12 years, and in a town of 3,800 people, you get to know the rhythms of the place. You know who drinks too much on Fridays, whose kids sneak out at night, which couples fight but never file reports. You become part counselor, part enforcer, part guardian angel for a community that's small enough that everyone knows everyone else's business, but big enough that secrets can still fester in the dark corners. The call came in on a Thursday afternoon in late November. just as the first real cold snap of winter was settling over our little corner of rural Pennsylvania. I was finishing up some paperwork at the station when our dispatcher, Betty, flagged me down. "Bartholomew got a welfare check request for you. Cornelius Blackwood, out on Old Mill Road." I knew Cornelius, or at least knew of him. 83 years old, lived alone in his family's farmhouse about 4 miles outside town proper. He'd been something of a fixture in Cedar Brook for as long as anyone could remember. A retired chemistry professor from the state college, widowed for the past 15 years, kept to himself mostly, but not in an unfriendly way. Just a quiet old man living out his final years in the house where he'd been born. "Who called it in?" I asked, already reaching for my jacket. "Evangeline Morse. Says she's his niece, calling from Philadelphia. Claims she hasn't been able to reach him for 2 weeks, which is unusual. He normally calls her every Sunday." I knew Evangeline too, though not personally. She'd grown up in Cedar Brook but moved to the city years ago for work. She'd visit Cornelius during holidays, always stopping by the station to say hello and thank us for keeping an eye on her uncle. Nice woman, mid-40s, worked as a nurse at some big hospital downtown. "She'd try calling his neighbors?" I asked. "The Blackwood place doesn't really have neighbors, Bartholomew. Nearest house is the old Henley farm, and that's been empty for 3 years. That was true. Cornelius lived in one of the most isolated spots in our jurisdiction, surrounded by fallow fields and encroaching forest. The kind of place where you could scream for help and no one would hear you." "All right, I'll head out there now." Probably just his phone giving him trouble again. Cornelius was notorious for his distrust of modern technology. He still had a rotary phone from the 1970s that broke down every few months. The drive out to Old Mill Road took about 15 minutes. The road itself was poorly maintained, more patches than original asphalt, winding through increasingly dense woodland. The trees were bare now, their skeletal branches reaching across the road like grasping fingers. My patrol car's heater was working overtime, but I could still see my breath misting in the air. The Blackwood farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, a 2-story colonial that had probably been white once, but had faded to a tired gray. The roof needed work. I could see missing shingles even from the driveway, and the wraparound porch was sagging on one side. But there was smoke coming from the chimney, which was a good sign. At least the old man was keeping warm. I parked behind Cornelius's ancient Ford pickup, which was covered in a layer of leaves and pine needles. That was concerning. It looked like it hadn't been moved in a while. The mailbox at the end of the driveway had been full when I passed it, stuffed with what looked like weeks of accumulated mail. I knocked on the front door, the sound echoing hollow through the house. "Mr. Blackwood? It's Officer Bartholomew Ridge with the Cedar Brook Police. Your niece asked me to check on you, sir." No response. I knocked again, harder. "Mr. Blackwood? Cornelius? I need you to come to the door or answer me, sir." Still nothing, but I thought I heard something inside, a shuffling sound, like someone moving around slowly. Old hardwood floors in these farmhouses creaked with every step, and I was definitely hearing movement. I tried the doorknob, locked. I walked around to the side of the house, peering through windows. The curtains were drawn on all of them, but through a gap in the kitchen window covering I could see dishes piled in the sink, food left out on the counter. That wasn't like Cornelius at all. From what I knew of him, he was fastidiously neat, the kind of old bachelor who kept everything in perfect order. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm getting concerned here. If you don't respond, I'm going to have to enter the property to check on your welfare." That shuffling sound again, closer to the door this time. Then, finally, a voice, thin, reedy, but definitely Cornelius. Go away. I'm fine. Mr. Blackwood, I need to see you, sir. Your niece is worried. Can you open the door? Tell Evangeline I'm fine. Just leave me be. There was something in his voice that set off my internal alarms. Not just the usual cranky old man wanting to be left alone. There was fear in it. Real, palpable fear. Sir, I can't do that. I need to visually confirm you're okay. It's procedure. You can open the door just a crack if you want, but I need to see you. Long pause. Then the sound of multiple locks being undone. Deadbolts, chain locks, more than I remembered being on that door the last time I'd been out here about a year ago for a similar check. The door opened maybe 3 inches, held by a new chain lock. Through the gap, I could see a sliver of Cornelius's face. He looked terrible, gaunt, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. But more than that, his eyes were darting around, looking past me, scanning the yard behind me like he expected something to jump out of the woods. See? I'm fine. Now go. Mr. Blackwood, you don't look fine. When's the last time you ate a proper meal or slept? That's none of your concern, officer. Actually, it is. Your niece is worried, and frankly, so am I. Can I come in? Just for a few minutes? No. The vehemence of his response surprised us both. He seemed to realize how that sounded and tried to soften it. I mean, no, thank you. I'm not feeling well. Might be contagious. Flu season, you know. Sir, if you're sick, that's even more reason for me to check on you. Do you need medical attention? I need to be left alone. He started to close the door. I put my hand on it, gently but firmly, keeping it open. Cornelius, talk to me. What's going on? This isn't like you. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd seen before in other circumstances. The look of someone who desperately wanted to tell the truth but was too terrified to do so. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, he whispered. Try me. I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've heard everything. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Not this. Not this. Is someone threatening you? Are you in some kind of trouble? Someone? He laughed again, that same bitter sound. No, officer. Not someone. Something. Before I could respond, his eyes went wide, looking at something over my shoulder. He slammed the door shut, and I heard the locks engaging rapidly, one after another. I turned around, hand instinctively going to my service weapon. There was nothing there, just my patrol car, the overgrown yard, the woods beyond. But the woods did seem darker than they should be for 3 in the afternoon, and there was a strange smell in the air. Something organic and wrong, like compost mixed with copper. I knocked on the door again, but Cornelius wouldn't respond. I could hear him moving around inside, talking to himself in a low, agitated voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear, panic, barely controlled. I called Betty at dispatch. I need backup out at the Blackwood place. Something's not right here. What kind of not right? She asked. I'm not sure yet. The subject is exhibiting signs of extreme paranoia, possible mental health crisis. But Betty, bring Tom or Marcus, someone with experience. This feels off. While I waited for backup, I walked the perimeter of the property. The house was in worse shape than I'd initially thought. Several windows on the second floor were boarded up from the inside, and I could see what looked like salt lines on some of the windowsills. The back door had been reinforced with new locks and what appeared to be steel brackets. In the backyard, things got stranger. There were holes dug seemingly at random, each about 3 feet deep, maybe a dozen of them scattered around. Next to one of the fresher holes was a shovel and a bucket filled with what looked like a mixture of salt, iron filings, and something else I couldn't identify. The smell was coming from these holes, that rotting, copper scent that made my stomach turn. But it was what I found in the old barn that really set my nerves on edge. The doors were chained shut from the outside, padlocked with a heavy-duty lock that looked brand new. Through a gap in the wood, I could see that the inside had been cleared out, all the old farming equipment pushed to the sides. In the center of the barn floor was a large circle drawn in what looked like white paint or chalk, filled with symbols I didn't recognize. They weren't any kind of graffiti I'd seen before. They looked older, more deliberate, like something out of a history book about medieval times. And in the center of the circle was a chair. Just a simple wooden chair with leather straps attached to the arms and legs. The straps were worn, like they'd been used recently and repeatedly. There were dark stains on the floor around the chair that looked suspiciously like dried blood. I was reaching for my radio to update dispatch when I heard a car approaching. But it wasn't one of our patrol cars. It was a black sedan with Philadelphia plates. Evangeline Morse had decided to check on her uncle in person. She got out of the car looking worried but put together, dressed in hospital scrubs under a heavy coat. "Officer Ridge, I remember you. Is Uncle Cornelius okay?" "Miss Morse, I'm going to need you to stay back for now. Your uncle is inside the house, but he's showing signs of distress. We're treating this as a potential mental health situation." "Mental health? Uncle Cornelius?" She looked genuinely shocked. "He's the sanest person I know, sharp as a tack. We were just talking about quantum physics last month. He was explaining some new theory to me. When exactly did you last speak with him?" She thought for a moment. 2 weeks ago Sunday. He calls every week like clockwork, 7 p.m. sharp. When he didn't call, I figured maybe he forgot. But then the next week came and went. I tried calling him, but no answer. That's when I really got worried." "Did he sound normal during your last conversation?" "Yes, completely. We talked about my work, about the early snow this year, about—" She paused, frowning. "Actually, now that I think about it, he did mention something odd. He said he'd been having trouble with animals getting into the house. Raccoons or something. Said they were acting strange, aggressive. He was thinking about calling an exterminator." "Animals?" I looked back at the house with its boarded windows and reinforced doors. That was a lot of fortification for raccoons. Tom Garrett arrived then, one of our senior officers. He was a good cop, steady, had been on the force for 20 years. I quickly briefed him on the situation, including what I'd found in the barn. "Jesus," he muttered. "Sounds like the old man's lost it. Paranoid delusions, maybe? It happens with isolation and age." "Maybe," I said, but something about this felt different from the usual mental health calls. The preparations were too elaborate, too specific. This wasn't random paranoia. This was targeted fear. "Let me try talking to him," Evangeline said. "He trusts me." I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but family could sometimes reach people when officials couldn't. "All right, but Tom and I are staying right with you." We approached the front door together. Evangeline knocked gently. "Uncle Cornelius?" "It's Evangeline. I drove up from Philly to see you." The response was immediate. "Evangeline, no, you shouldn't be here. You need to leave, now." "Uncle, please, I'm worried about you. The police are here too. We just want to help." "The police can't help." "No one can help. It's too late. It knows I know. It knows what I've been doing." "What knows, Uncle?" "What are you talking about?" There was a long silence. Then, in a voice so quiet we could barely hear it, "The thing in the woods. The thing that's been taking people." Tom and I exchanged glances. This was taking a turn I hadn't expected. In my experience, when elderly people started talking about things in the woods, It usually meant dementia or a UTI causing hallucinations. But the elaborate preparations, the specific fortifications, those suggested something more complex was happening in Cornelius's mind. "Uncle," Evangeline said, her voice steady despite her obvious concern, "there's nothing in the woods. You're safe. Will you please let us in so we can talk?" "You don't understand," Cornelius said through the door. "I have proof. I've documented everything. 3 months of observations, measurements, samples. It's real, Evangeline. God help me, it's real." "What kind of proof?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I figured out our next move. "Scientific proof. Chemical analysis of the residue it leaves behind. Photographs of the tracks. Audio recordings of its calls. I was a scientist for 40 years, officer. I know the difference between imagination and empirical evidence." Tom leaned close to me. "We need to get in there. He could be a danger to himself." I agreed, but I wanted to avoid forcing entry if possible. That would only escalate the situation. "Mr. Blackwood, if you have evidence of a crime or a danger to the community, I need to see it. That's my job." There was a long pause. "Then you won't believe me." No one ever believes until it's too late. "Try me," I said. "If you have real evidence, I promise I'll look at it objectively." More silence. Then slowly, the locks began to disengage again. This time, the door opened wider, though Cornelius stayed partially hidden behind it. "Just you," he said, pointing at me. "Not them. I don't know them well enough." "Uncle," Evangeline started, but I held up a hand. "It's okay." "Tom, stay with Miss Morse. I'll be fine." Tom didn't like it, I could tell, but he nodded. I stepped inside, and Cornelius quickly shut and locked the door behind me. The inside of the house was worse than I'd imagined. Every window was covered with heavy blankets nailed to the frames. Salt lines ran along every doorway and windowsill. Strange symbols were drawn on the walls in what looked like charcoal. The smell was overwhelming. That copper compost scent mixed with unwashed human and rotting food. But it was organized chaos. There was a clear method to it. A large table in the living room was covered with maps, photographs, and notebooks. Red pins marked locations on a topographical map of the area. String connected some of the pins, creating a pattern I couldn't immediately discern. "This is my research," Cornelius said, gesturing to the table with shaking hands. 3 months of work. It started in September, right after the Henley family disappeared. The Henleys. They'd owned the farm about a mile from here. One day, in early September, they'd just vanished. Parents and 2 teenage kids left everything behind, including their cars and wallets. It had been big news for a few weeks. The official theory was that they'd been in financial trouble and had run off to start over somewhere else, but no one really believed it. You don't leave without taking anything, not even a change of clothes. "You think something happened to the Henleys?" I asked. "I know something happened to them," Cornelius said. He pulled out a notebook, flipping to a page covered in his neat handwriting. "September 3rd, 2:47 a.m. I heard screaming from the direction of the Henley farm. Not normal screaming, it was wrong. Too high-pitched, almost like an animal, but clearly human. I called 911, but by the time you people got there, they were gone." I remembered that call. I hadn't been on duty, but I'd heard about it. Officers had found the Henley house empty, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just an empty house with dinner still on the table. "After that, I started paying attention," Cornelius continued. "I set up cameras around my property, motion sensors, audio recorders, and I started catching things." He pulled out a laptop, ancient by modern standards but functional. He opened a folder filled with video files. This was from September 15th, 3:33 a.m. The video was grainy, shot in night vision from what looked like a camera mounted on his barn. For the first few seconds, it showed nothing but the edge of the woods. Then, something moved among the trees. It was hard to make out, just a shape, really. But it was big, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and it moved wrong. Not like a bear or a person. It seemed to flow between the trees, almost liquid in its movement. "That's probably just a bear," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't convinced. I'd seen plenty of bears, and they didn't move like that. "That's what I thought at first," Cornelius said. He clicked on another file. This is from September 22nd. Same camera. This time, the figure was closer, at the edge of his yard. The night vision gave everything a green tint, but I could see more details. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I could immediately identify. It was bipedal, but hunched, covered in what looked like dark, matted fur or hair. But the proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, legs bent at angles that didn't make sense. "What the hell is that?" I muttered. "I don't know," Cornelius said. "But watch this." He clicked play on another video. This one showed the thing approaching one of the holes he'd dug in his backyard. It stopped at the edge, then recoiled, letting out a sound that made my skin crawl. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to have multiple tones, like several voices growling in harmony. "The holes are filled with a mixture I developed," Cornelius explained. "Iron filings, salt and sulfur, along with some other compounds. It seems to repel it. That's why I dug them all around the property, to create a barrier." "Mr. Blackwood," I said carefully, "these videos are interesting, but they could be explained in other ways. Someone in a costume may be trying to scare you." He laughed bitterly. "That's what I wanted to believe. But then I found this." He opened another folder, this one filled with photographs. They showed tracks in the mud, large, three-toed prints with what looked like claw marks. A ruler placed next to one print showed it was nearly 18 inches long. These were at the Henley farm, near their back door. I took these photos before the rain washed them away. And there's more. He pulled out a glass jar filled with a dark, viscous substance. This is the residue it leaves behind. I've analyzed it. It contains proteins and enzymes I've never seen before. The molecular structure doesn't match any known biological material. "You analyzed it? How?" "I still have friends at the college. I sent samples to them under the pretense of it being an unknown fungal growth. They couldn't identify it either, said it was like nothing in any database. I was starting to feel overwhelmed. Either Cornelius had constructed the most elaborate delusion I'd ever seen, complete with fabricated evidence, or number. There had to be a rational explanation. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" I asked. I tried. I called the state police, the FBI, even a cryptozoologist I found online. No one took me seriously. That's when I realized it knows I know. It's been watching me, waiting, getting closer. He showed me more videos. In each one, the thing appeared closer to his house. The most recent, from just 3 nights ago, showed it standing at his front door, just out of frame of the camera, but its shadow visible in the moonlight. It stood there for nearly an hour, not moving, just waiting. "That's when I stopped sleeping," Cornelius said. "It's testing my defenses, looking for a way in. And I think it's learning." "Learning?" He nodded, pulling out another notebook. This one was filled with observations, times, dates, patterns. It avoids the cameras now, mostly. Stays just out of range, It's figured out where the motion sensors are, and last week—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Last week, I found scratches on my bedroom window, from the inside. From the inside? But that's impossible if it can't get in. I know. That's what terrifies me. Either it found a way in that I don't know about, or—" He trailed off. "Or what? Or there's more than one, and one has been inside all along." A chill ran down my spine. I looked around the cluttered, dimly lit house with new eyes. Every shadow seemed threatening, every creak of the old house ominous. "Mr. Blackwood, I think we need to get you out of here. You can stay with your niece for a while, get some rest, and—" "No!" He grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't you understand? It's not after me specifically. I'm just in its territory. If I leave, it'll just move on to someone else. Someone who isn't prepared. At least here, I have defenses. Then we need to involve more people. The state police, wildlife services, they won't believe it until they see it. And by then, it might be too late." He looked at me with desperate eyes. "Officer Ridge, I know how this sounds. I know you think I'm crazy, but I'm asking you, begging you, to just consider the possibility that I'm not. Look at the evidence, really look at it." I spent the next hour going through his materials more carefully. The videos were disturbing, certainly, but videos could be faked. The tracks could be manufactured. The residue, that was harder to explain, but there could be natural explanations. But it was the pattern on the map that finally made me pause. The red pins marked sightings, disappearances, and strange incidents going back 3 months. But when I looked closer, I realized they went back further. Cornelius had added newspaper clippings and historical records. Missing persons, unexplained deaths dating back decades. They formed a rough circle with about a 5-mile radius, centered on a particular section of the woods. "This has been happening for years?" I asked. "Longer. I found records at the Historical Society going back to the 1800s. Native American legends before that. They called it the hunger that walks. Said it slept for years at a time, then woke to feed. And you think it's awake now?" "I know it is. The Henleys were just the beginning. Check your missing persons reports for the last 3 months. Not just from Cedar Brook, from all the surrounding towns." I thought about it. There had been an uptick in missing persons cases recently. We'd attributed it to the usual causes. People running from debt, domestic situations, the opioid crisis. But what if— number? I was letting myself get pulled into his delusion. There had to be a rational explanation. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to make some calls, check on some of this information. Will you be okay if I step outside?" He nodded, but grabbed my arm again as I turned to go. "Officer Ridge, whatever you do, don't go into the woods, not at night. And if you hear it calling, it can mimic voices, sound like someone you know. Don't follow, that's how it got the Henleys. Their youngest daughter heard her friend calling from the woods. She went to look, and the whole family went after her." I stepped outside, my mind racing. Tom and Evangeline were still waiting by the patrol car, looking anxious. "Well?" Tom asked. "He's coherent, paranoid definitely, but coherent. He believes something is stalking him, something from the woods." "Dementia?" Evangeline asked, though she didn't sound convinced. "I don't think so. He's got evidence of something. I need to make some calls." I radioed Betty, asked her to pull up missing persons reports for the last 6 months, not just from our jurisdiction, but from all surrounding counties. While I waited, I filled Tom in on what I'd seen inside. "Videos can be faked," Tom said, "especially grainy night vision stuff." "I know, but the detail, the consistency, if it's a hoax, it's elaborate. Betty's voice crackled over the radio. "Bartholomew, I've got those numbers. You're not going to like this. We've had 17 missing persons cases in a 30-mile radius in the last 3 months. That's 5 times the normal rate." 17. That was significant. Any patterns? Connections? Not that I can see from the basic data, but Bartholomew, 4 of them were last seen near wooded areas. And there's something else. State police found a body yesterday about 10 miles from your location. Hiker, been missing for a week. The condition of the body was unusual. Unusual how? Report says extensive tissue damage, like from an animal attack, but the pattern didn't match any known predator. And there were chemical burns, like from some kind of acidic substance. I felt my blood run cold. Cornelius had mentioned the residue having unusual properties. "Betty, I need you to contact state police. Tell them we might have a situation out here. Possible dangerous wildlife, unknown species." Unknown species? Bartholomew, what's going on out there? "I'm not sure yet. Just make the call." I looked back at the house, then at the darkening woods beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky a deep red. In less than an hour, it would be dark. "Tom, I think we need to get everyone out of here now." "You actually believe the old man?" "I believe something's not right, and I'd rather err on the side of caution." We approached the house again. I knocked, telling Cornelius we were going to evacuate him for his safety, but this time there was no response. "Mr. Blackwood? Cornelius?" Nothing. I tried the door. It was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells. Cornelius had been obsessive about keeping it locked. We entered carefully, Tom with his hand on his weapon. The house was quiet, too quiet. The laptop was still open on the table, but Cornelius was nowhere to be seen. "Uncle Cornelius?" Evangeline called out, worry clear in her voice. That's when we heard it, a sound from upstairs. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, too heavy to be Cornelius. "Sir, this is the police. Identify yourself," Tom called out. The footsteps stopped. Then, in perfect mimicry of Cornelius's voice, "I'm fine, officers. Just getting something from my bedroom." But it was wrong. The cadence was off, like someone had recorded Cornelius and was playing it back at the wrong speed. Evangeline gasped. "That's not him. That's not my uncle." The footsteps started again, moving toward the stairs. Whatever was up there was coming down. "Everyone out, now," I said, my voice low but urgent. I drew my service weapon and Tom did the same. "But my uncle," Evangeline started. "Miss." "Morse, get to the patrol car and lock the doors. Call for backup. Go." She hesitated for just a moment, then ran. I heard the front door slam behind her. The footsteps on the stairs were getting closer. Each step was deliberate, measured, and far too heavy. The old wooden stairs groaned under the weight. "Whatever's up there, we handle this by the book," Tom whispered. Could be an intruder, could be Cornelius having some kind of episode. But we both knew it wasn't Cornelius. The sound, the weight, the wrongness of that voice. Every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of police work was screaming danger. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. We could see a shadow on the wall, cast by the dim light from upstairs. The shadow was wrong, too tall, too broad, with proportions that didn't match any human frame. Then it spoke again, still using Cornelius's voice but even more distorted. "Officers, there's no need for alarm. Everything is fine. Show yourself," I commanded, my weapon raised but pointed at the ground. "Slowly, with your hands visible." The shadow moved, and something appeared at the top of the stairs. In the dim light, I first thought it was Cornelius, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the truth was far worse. It was wearing Cornelius's clothes, or rather, Cornelius's clothes were stretched over something that wasn't quite the right shape. The shirt was torn at the seams, hanging loose over a frame that was too large, too angular. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. It was like someone had taken Cornelius's features and stretched them over something else, like a mask that didn't quite fit. The eyes were wrong, too large, too dark, reflecting the light like an animal's. "Drop the weapon," it said, still in that horrible mimicry of Cornelius's voice. "Where's Cornelius?" I demanded. "What did you do with him?" It tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "I am Cornelius. See?" It smiled, revealing far too many teeth. Tom fired first. 3 shots center mass, exactly as we were trained. The thing staggered back but didn't fall. Instead, it let out a sound that I'll never forget, a screech that seemed to come from multiple throats, harmonizing in a way that made my teeth ache. Then it moved. Fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move. It came down the stairs in 2 bounds, and suddenly it was on Tom. He screamed as it grabbed him, lifting him off the ground with one elongated arm. I fired, emptying my clip into the thing. It dropped Tom and turned toward me, and for a moment I saw it clearly in the muzzle flash. It wasn't wearing Cornelius's clothes. It had somehow incorporated them into itself. The fabric melding with what looked like dark, mottled skin. Its face was shifting, features rearranging themselves, trying different configurations like it was trying to remember how to look human. It lunged at me, and I dove sideways, crashing into Cornelius's research table. Papers and photographs scattered everywhere. My hand landed on the jar of residue Cornelius had shown me, and without thinking, I grabbed it and threw it at the creature. The jar shattered against its chest, and the effect was immediate. The thing recoiled, screeching, clawing at itself where the substance had splashed. Smoke rose from its skin, and the smell... God, the smell was indescribable, like burning rubber mixed with rotting meat. It fled, crashing through the boarded-up back door, leaving splinters of wood and torn fabric in its wake. I could hear it moving through the yard, setting off Cornelius's motion sensors, heading for the woods. I rushed to Tom. He was alive but unconscious, with the deep gashes on his arms and chest. I radioed for emergency medical immediately, then remembered Evangeline was still outside. I found her in the patrol car, on the radio with dispatch. "I need all available units and EMS to Old Mill Road immediately," she was saying, her nurse training taking over despite her fear. "Officer down, multiple injuries, possible." "It's gone," I told her. "But Tom's hurt." "You're a nurse. I need your help." She didn't hesitate, grabbing a first aid kit from the trunk and following me inside. While she worked on Tom, I tried to process what had just happened. That thing, whatever it wasn't human, couldn't be human. But it had been trying to be Cornelius, wearing his appearance like an ill-fitting suit, which meant... "Oh, God," I said, "Cornelius." I ran through the house, checking every room. I found him in the basement behind an old coal bin. He was alive but unconscious, with strange marks on his neck and arms. Not cuts or bruises, but patterns that looked almost like burns or chemical exposure. His pulse was weak but steady. By the time backup arrived, 4 patrol cars and 2 ambulances, I had moved Cornelius upstairs. Evangeline had managed to stabilize Tom, though he'd need surgery for the lacerations. Sheriff Douglas himself showed up, a gruff man in his 60s who'd seen everything in his 40 years of law enforcement. Or so he thought. "Ridge, what the hell happened here?" he demanded. How could I explain that we'd been attacked by something that could mimic human appearance and voice? That Cornelius's paranoid preparations had been completely justified? Unknown assailant, I said carefully. Possibly on drugs. Extreme strength and aggression. It fled into the woods after attacking Officer Garrett. Douglas looked at the destroyed back door, the bullet holes in the walls, the scattered research on the table. Drugs? This looks like a war zone. Sheriff, I think we need to look at Mr. Blackwood's research. He's been documenting something in these woods, something that might explain the missing persons cases. Douglas picked up one of the photographs, the three-toed tracks. What is this Bigfoot nonsense? I don't know what it is, but I saw it. Tom saw it, and there's evidence. Evidence of what? That some meth head in a costume attacked you. I could see I was losing him. Without seeing it himself, he'd never believe. Hell, I barely believed it, and I'd look the thing in the face. The EMTs loaded Tom and Cornelius into ambulances. Evangeline rode with her uncle, refusing to leave his side. As they drove away, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Three-toed prints in the mud near where the ambulances had been parked. Fresh ones. It had been watching us. Over the next 3 days, things got complicated. Tom underwent surgery and would recover, though he'd have scars for life. When he woke up, he claimed not to remember the attack clearly, said it was all a blur, probably trauma-induced memory loss. But when I visited him alone, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "You saw it too, right?" "I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy," I assured him. Cornelius remained unconscious for 2 days. When he finally woke, he was disoriented but coherent. He remembered the thing entering his house, remembered trying to hide, but everything after that was blank. The doctors couldn't explain the marks on his body. They looked like chemical burns but didn't match any known substance. The official report filed by Sheriff Douglas listed the incident as an assault by an unknown individual, possibly under the influence of narcotics. The state police came in, did a perfunctory investigation, found no evidence of the assailant, and closed the case as unsolved. But I couldn't let it go. I spent my off hours studying Cornelius's research. The map, the timeline, the patterns. If he was right, this thing, whatever it was, had been here for over a century, maybe longer. It would disappear for years, even decades, then return to feed, and each time it returned, people would disappear. I found a journal entry from a Cedar Brook sheriff in 1952. Found tracks near the Morrison disappearance site. Three-toed, like nothing I've seen. Old Samuel Blackwood claims it's the same thing that took his brother in 1923. Nonsense, of course, but the tracks are troubling. Samuel Blackwood, Cornelius's father. I visited Cornelius in the hospital. He was being kept for observation, more for psychological evaluation than physical injuries. Evangeline was there, barely leaving his side. "It's been in your family's area for generations," I told him quietly when Evangeline stepped out for coffee. He nodded weakly. "My father knew. My grandfather, too. They tried to warn people, but no one listened. The family was labeled as crackpots, conspiracy theorists, but we knew. We've always known. Why didn't you leave? Why stay near it?" "Someone has to watch," he said. "Someone has to document it, try to understand it, and I think it can't go far from its territory. The woods, they're its home, its hunting ground. If my family hadn't stayed, hadn't kept watch, how many more would have disappeared without anyone noticing the pattern? The thing that attacked us, it was trying to look like you." He shuddered. "It's learning. Evolving, maybe. My grandfather's journals mention it could mimic voices, but never appearances. If it's learned to copy faces, bodies." He trailed off, the implications clear. "What do we do?" "I don't know. I thought understanding it would help, but I was wrong." It's beyond understanding. It's just hunger. Ancient, patient hunger. I left the hospital with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. That night, I drove out to Old Mill Road. Cornelius's house stood empty, the broken door covered with police tape. I parked at the end of the driveway and watched the woods with my spotlight, looking for any sign of movement. At around midnight, I heard it. A voice calling from the woods. My voice. "Help me," it called in perfect mimicry. "Someone help me, I'm hurt." I sat frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I stayed, documenting it on my phone, adding to Cornelius's evidence. The voice continued for an hour, trying different phrases, different tones. Sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding. It knew I was there. It was trying to lure me in. Finally, as dawn approached, it gave up. But just before it went silent, it said something that chilled me to the bone. Not in my voice this time, but in Tom's. "Ridge, where are you? I need backup. Ridge." It had been there during the attack. Learning our voices, our names, our procedures, it was studying us. I drove home as the sun rose, exhausted and terrified. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Cornelius had said. Someone had to watch, someone had to know. I started my own documentation that day, building on Cornelius's work but being more careful, more covert. I installed trail cameras in the woods, hidden and camouflaged. I tracked the missing persons cases, looking for patterns. I studied the chemical composition of the residue it left behind. And I waited. 3 weeks after the attack, another family disappeared. The Kovacs, who lived about 3 miles from the Blackwood place. Romanian immigrants who'd bought a cheap farmhouse to fix up. They vanished in the night, leaving behind dinner on the table and all their belongings. The official investigation found nothing. But I found tracks. 3-toed, 18 inches long. And something else, scratches on their door frame, from the inside, like someone had tried desperately to keep something out. I brought my findings to Sheriff Douglas, but he shut me down. "Ridge, you're becoming obsessed, just like Old Man Blackwood. Don't go down that path." But someone had to. Someone had to watch, to document, to try to find a way to stop it. Because it was getting bolder. The disappearances were becoming more frequent, and it was learning, adapting, becoming better at mimicking us. 2 months after the attack, I got a call from Evangeline. Cornelius had been released from psychiatric hold and was staying with her in Philadelphia, but he wanted to return to Cedar Brook. "He says he has to finish his work," she told me. "I've tried to talk him out of it, but he's adamant. He says someone has to watch." "He's right," I said, surprising myself. "Someone does." There was a pause. Then, "Officer Ridge, do you believe him? About all of it?" "Miss Morse, I saw it, I fought it, I have the evidence. Yes, I believe him." "Then what do we do?" "We watch, we document, we try to understand it, and we warn people even if they don't believe us. Because what else can we do?" She sighed. "I'll bring him back next week." Will you help him? Help us?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I will." Because I'd realized something in those 2 months of investigation. The thing in the woods wasn't going away. It had been here long before us, and it would be here long after. But as long as someone was watching, as long as someone knew the truth, maybe we could minimize the damage. Maybe we could save some lives. Or maybe we were just fooling ourselves, playing watchman to something beyond our comprehension. Either way, I couldn't walk away. Not anymore. I'd seen the face of the thing that haunts our woods, and once you've seen something like that, you can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. You can only watch and wait, and hope that when it comes for you, you're ready. Cornelius returned to Cedar Brook the following week, but not to his family home. The house on Old Mill Road remained empty, too damaged and too dangerous. Instead, Evangeline rented him a small apartment in town, close to other people, with multiple exits and good lighting. He seemed frailer than before, aged by his ordeal, but his mind remained sharp. We met regularly, comparing notes, reviewing footage from my trail cameras. Most showed nothing, but occasionally we'd catch a glimpse. A shadow moving between trees, eye shine where no animal should be, tracks appearing overnight in places that had been clear the evening before. The town, meanwhile, tried to return to normal. The official story was that a drifter high on drugs had attacked officers at the Blackwood farm, then disappeared into the wilderness. Most people accepted this explanation because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. Tom returned to duty after 6 weeks of recovery, but he was different. Quieter, more watchful. He never spoke about that night directly, but sometimes I'd catch him staring at the woods during patrol, his hand unconsciously moving to the scars on his chest. Then, in early February, 3 months after the initial attack, things escalated. It started with pets going missing, dogs and cats vanishing from yards, even some that were kept indoors somehow disappearing when owners weren't looking. Then livestock, chickens, goats, even a few cattle from the Jameson farm. Always at night, always without a trace except for those distinctive three-toed tracks that the authorities insisted were unidentified. But I knew better. It was feeding more frequently, growing bolder. The barrier between its woods and our town was breaking down. The breaking point came on February 15th. I was on night patrol when I got a call about a disturbance at Cedar Brook Elementary School. Someone had reported seeing a figure on the playground moving strangely. I arrived to find the playground empty, but the gate to the school grounds was open. The chain-link fence bent outward as if something large had pushed through. On the ground, illuminated by my flashlight, were tracks, fresh ones, leading toward the school building. My blood went cold. It was 10 p.m., the school was empty, but the janitor would still be there. Harold Vance, a quiet man in his 50s who always worked the late shift. I called for backup, then approached the school. The main door was open, hanging off its hinges. Inside, the hallway lights flickered intermittently, creating pools of shadow between islands of harsh fluorescent light. "Harold?" I called out. "This is Officer Ridge. Are you in here?" A sound echoed from deeper in the building. Footsteps, but wrong. Too heavy, with an irregular rhythm like something trying to remember how to walk. I followed the sound, my weapon drawn, every nerve on edge. The tracks led to the cafeteria, where I found Harold's cleaning cart overturned, supplies scattered across the floor. But no Harold. Then I heard his voice coming from the kitchen. "Officer, is that you?" "I'm in here. I fell. I think I hurt my leg." It sounded like Harold, but I'd learned not to trust voices anymore. I approached the kitchen carefully, peering through the serving window. Harold was there, sitting on the floor, holding his leg. But something was off. His proportions were wrong. Arms slightly too long, neck bent at an odd angle. And his eyes reflected my flashlight like a cat's. "Harold," I said carefully, "what's your wife's name?" "What?" The thing wearing Harold's appearance looked confused. "Why are you asking that?" "I'm hurt. Help me." "Your wife's name, Harold." "Tell me her name." It tilted its head, that unnatural movement I'd seen before. Mary. Her name is Mary. Harold's wife was named Dorothy. I'd met her at the department Christmas party 2 months ago. I backed away slowly. "Stay there, Harold. Help is coming." The thing stood up, no longer pretending to be injured. "You know," it said, Harold's voice distorting, becoming multi-tonal. "You're the watching one, the one who knows." Where's the real Harold? It smiled, Harold's face stretching impossibly wide. Safe. Sleeping. In the dark place. Like the others. Others? What others? The ones who fed the hunger. The ones who walked into the woods when called. They sleep now, in the deep place, until the hunger needs them again. My radio crackled. Backup was arriving. The thing heard it too, and its borrowed face twisted into something like disappointment. You make this harder, it said. The old watcher, he understood. Stay in your territory, we stay in ours, but territories change. Hunger grows. The old watcher, you mean Cornelius's father, grandfather? Many watchers, many years. You watch, we hunt. Balance. But balance broken now. Too many of you spreading into our places. So we must spread too. Sirens were getting closer. The thing moved toward the back exit, but I stepped in front of it. I can't let you leave. It laughed, a sound like grinding glass. You cannot stop what has always been. We were here before your kind walked upright. We will be here after your dust. Maybe, but not tonight. I pulled out a bottle from my belt, a mixture Cornelius and I had developed based on his research. Iron filings, salt, sulfur, and something else he'd discovered. An extract from those purple foxgloves that grew where his house had been. Apparently, they absorbed something from the soil, something that the creature left behind, and concentrated it into a natural repellent. I threw the bottle, and it shattered against the thing's chest. The reaction was immediate and violent. It screamed. Not Harold's voice now, but its true voice, that multi-harmonic shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Its borrowed form began to shift and bubble, Harold's appearance melting away like wax. What was underneath, I can't fully describe it. It was wrong in every way something could be wrong. Too many angles, too many joints, covered in something that wasn't quite skin or fur or scales, but somehow all three. It moved wrong, existed wrong, like reality itself was rejecting its presence. It fled, crashing through the wall, not the door, the actual brick wall, leaving a hole that shouldn't have been possible for something to create with mere physical force. When backup arrived, they found me standing in the destroyed cafeteria, staring at the hole in the wall. Sheriff Douglas took one look at the scene and the expression on my face and didn't ask for an explanation. Not then. We found Harold an hour later, in a maintenance tunnel under the school. He was unconscious but alive, with those same chemical burn marks Cornelius had. When he woke up, he remembered nothing after arriving for his shift. That night changed everything. The sheriff couldn't ignore it anymore, not with the physical evidence, the hole in the wall that defied explanation, the chemical residue that didn't match any known substance, the surveillance footage that showed something impossible. A task force was formed, quietly, unofficially. Myself, Tom, 2 state police officers who'd had their own encounters they couldn't explain, and Cornelius as a civilian consultant. We were given resources, told to handle the situation but also told to keep it quiet. No media, no public panic. Cornelius was vindicated but took no satisfaction in it. I wanted to be wrong, he told me. God, how I wanted to be wrong. We developed protocols. The mixture that repelled it was mass-produced and distributed to essential workers who had to be out at night. Motion sensors were installed at key points around town. A curfew was suggested but not enforced. How do you explain that without causing panic? For a while, it worked. The thing, or things, we were never sure if there was just one, kept to the woods. The disappearances stopped. We thought we'd reached a new balance. Then came the night of March 3rd. I was home, actually off duty for once, when my phone rang. It was Evangeline, and she was hysterical. "It's here," she sobbed, "in the apartment." "It's pretending to be Uncle Cornelius, but it's not him. The real one is with me. We're locked in the bathroom, but it's trying to get in." I grabbed my gear and raced to their apartment, calling for backup on the way. When I arrived, the front door was open. Inside, I could hear two voices, both Cornelius's. One was coming from the bathroom. "Officer Ridge, we're in here." It's out there, wearing my face. The other was in the living room. "Bartholomew, thank goodness you're here. They're imposters in my bathroom. You have to stop them." I entered carefully, weapon drawn. In the living room stood Cornelius, or something that looked exactly like him. Every detail perfect, down to the liver spots on his hands and the way he favored his left leg. "Bartholomew," it said, and the voice was perfect too. "They broke in. I don't know what they want, but they keep saying they're me." From the bathroom, "Don't listen to it. Ask it something only I would know." The thing in the living room smiled sadly. "It's learned to mimic my voice. It's trying to confuse you." This was the nightmare scenario we'd discussed but never figured out how to handle. Perfect mimicry, indistinguishable from the original. How do you tell the real from the fake when they're identical? Then I noticed something. The Cornelius in the living room was too steady. The real Cornelius had developed a slight tremor in his hands after his ordeal, barely noticeable, but always there. This one's hands were perfectly still. I shot it with a tranquilizer dart filled with our repellent mixture. The effect was immediate. The false Cornelius screamed and began to change, its perfect mimicry dissolving into that horrifying true form. But instead of fleeing, it spoke, its voice now a horrible amalgamation of everyone it had copied. "You delay the inevitable. We adapt, we learn. Soon you won't be able to tell. Soon we will walk among you, wearing your faces, living your lives. The hunger will be fed from within." Then it collapsed, seemingly unconscious. We contained it, the first time we'd managed to capture one. It was taken to a secure facility, studied, tested. But 12 hours later, when the scientists went to examine it, the containment cell was empty. No sign of escape, no breach in security. It had simply vanished. That was 6 months ago. Since then, the encounters have become less frequent but more disturbing. It's no longer just hunting. It's studying us, learning to be us. 3 times we've had reports of people seeing themselves in places they weren't. Twice we've had individuals show up in 2 places at once, with witnesses swearing both were real. Cornelius died 2 months ago. Natural causes, the doctors said. His heart simply gave out. But I was with him at the end, and his last words haunt me. "It's winning, Bartholomew. Not by destroying us, but by becoming us." How many are already here, wearing our faces, living our lives? How would we know? I don't have an answer to that. Evangeline moved back to Philadelphia, then to California, trying to distance herself from the horror. But she calls sometimes, tells me about strange things she's noticed. A coworker whose personality suddenly changed, a neighbor who seems to have forgotten basic human behaviors, having to relearn them. "Maybe I'm paranoid," she always says. "Maybe," I always reply, but we both know she's not. Tom transferred to another department in another state. He couldn't handle the uncertainty, the constant vigilance required. "I'd rather face a dozen armed criminals than one more night wondering if the person next to me is really human," he told me before he left. Sheriff Douglas retired early, officially due to health concerns. Unofficially, he told me he couldn't handle the responsibility of knowing what was out there and being unable to stop it. And me? I'm still here, still watching, still documenting. The new sheriff thinks I'm obsessed, maybe unstable. He's removed me from active patrol, assigned me to desk duty. But I continue my work in secret. Because someone has to watch. Someone has to know. The thing in the woods, or things, we never did determine if there was more than one, is still out there. The disappearances have stopped, but I think that's worse. It means they found another way to feed, a way we can't detect. Sometimes late at night I get calls. Wrong numbers, they say, but I recognize the voices. People who disappeared months ago, their voices perfect but wrong, asking strange questions. "What makes you human?" one asked. "How do you know you're real?" asked another. I've started keeping a journal, like Cornelius did, documenting everything, even the things that sound insane, because maybe someday someone will need this information. Someone will face what we faced and need to know they're not alone, not crazy. There's one last thing I need to document, something I've told no one else. Last week, I was looking through old photos from the department Christmas party, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the background of one photo, barely visible, was Tom. But the timestamp showed the photo was taken at 8:47 p.m., and I distinctly remember Tom arriving at 9:15. I'd commented on him being late. I've gone through all the photos from that night. Tom appears in 7 of them before his arrival. Always in the background, always watching, never interacting with anyone. Which means either the timestamps are wrong, my memory is faulty, or Tom, or something wearing his face, was there before Tom arrived. I've tried calling him at his new department. They say he's doing well, model officer, no problems, but they also mentioned something odd. He's volunteered for every night shift, says he prefers working in the dark now. The Tom I knew was afraid of the dark after that night at the Blackwood farm. I think about Cornelius's final words a lot. How many are already here? How would we know? I don't have answers. All I have are questions, and the growing certainty that we've already lost a war we didn't even know we were fighting. But I keep watching, I keep documenting, because maybe, just maybe, someone smarter than me will read this and figure out what we couldn't, how to tell them from us, how to stop them, how to reclaim our town, our lives, ourselves. Until then, I watch and I wait, and every time I look in the mirror I wonder, am I still me? How would I know if I wasn't? The welfare check that started all this was supposed to be routine, just checking on an elderly man who hadn't answered his phone. But it opened a door to something that can't be closed, revealed a truth that can't be unseen. Sometimes, in my darker moments, I think maybe it would have been better if we'd never responded to that call. If we'd left Cornelius to his fortifications and his fears, dismissed him as a paranoid old man. But then, I remember the families that might have been saved by our vigilance, the children who made it home because we were watching. And I know we did the right thing. Even if that thing was terrible. Even if it damned us. Because that's what we signed up for when we put on the badge to stand between the community and the darkness, whatever form that darkness takes. Even if the darkness is already here, wearing our faces, living our lives, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. Even if we've already lost. We still watch, we still fight, because what else can we do? My name is Officer Zebediah Cray, and I've been with the Brookhaven Police Department for 16 years. In a small Minnesota town of 5,200 people, you'd think missing pet cases would be the least of our worries. Routine calls that barely warrant a report. But what started as a simple missing cat complaint in April of last year turned into the most disturbing investigation of my career. The first call came from Ophelia Pemberton on April 8th, a Tuesday morning that had started like any other. I knew Ophelia well. She ran the local bookstore on Main Street, a woman in her early 50s who'd moved to Brookhaven from Boston about 10 years ago. She was what you'd call a pillar of the community. Organized the annual book fair, volunteered at the library, always had a kind word for everyone. "Officer Cray," she said when I answered the call, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry to bother you with something so trivial, but my cat Sebastian has been missing for 3 days now, and I'm starting to worry." Missing pets weren't unusual, especially in spring when animals got restless, but something in Ophelia's voice made me pay attention. This wasn't just concern. There was real fear there. "Tell me what happened, miss." "Pemberton," I said, grabbing my notepad. "Sebastian is an indoor cat," she explained. "He's never been outside on his own, ever. But Saturday night, he was acting strange, pacing by the windows, yowling at something outside. I've never seen him so agitated. Then, Sunday morning, I found the screen on my bedroom window had been pushed out from the inside and Sebastian was gone." "Pushed out from the inside?" I repeated. "You're sure?" "Positive. The screen was lying in the garden below, and there were claw marks on the window frame. It's like he was desperate to get out. But Officer Cray, Sebastian is terrified of the outdoors. Something must have called to him." That phrase, "called to him," stuck with me. It was an odd way to put it, but I wrote it down anyway. "I'll file a report and keep an eye out," I told her. "In the meantime, put up flyers, check with the neighbors." Cats usually don't go far, but even as I gave the standard advice, something felt off. When I hung up, I pulled up our recent reports. In the past 2 weeks, we'd had 7 missing pet calls. That was unusual for Brookhaven, where maybe we'd get 1 or 2 a month. I decided to drive over to Ophelia's house to take a look at the window. She lived in a Victorian-era home on Elm Street, one of those grand old houses that had been converted into apartments. Hers was on the 2nd floor. The window screen was still in the garden where it had fallen. The damage was extensive. Not just pushed out, but shredded in places, like the cat had clawed through it in a frenzy. The window frame showed deep gouges, and there was blood on some of the splinters. Not much, but enough to suggest Sebastian had hurt himself getting out. "He must have wanted out badly," I said to Ophelia, who was watching from the window above. "Or something wanted him out," she replied quietly. I spent the next hour canvassing the neighborhood, but no one had seen Sebastian. However, I did learn something interesting. Mrs. Garrett, who lived 3 houses down, mentioned that her dog had been acting strange all week, barking at nothing, refusing to go into the backyard at night, whimpering at shadows. "It's like he senses something we can't," she said. "Been happening to a lot of folks' pets lately." That afternoon, I decided to look deeper into the missing pet reports. What I found was a pattern that made my skin crawl. The disappearances weren't random. They followed a very specific geographic pattern, starting at the north end of town and moving steadily south. If you plotted them on a map, they formed an almost perfect line, like something was moving through town, taking animals as it went. But it was the timing that really caught my attention. Every disappearance happened between 2 and 4 a.m., always on nights with little to no moon. And in each case, the owners reported their pets acting strangely before vanishing. Extreme agitation, focusing on something unseen, trying desperately to get outside or, in some cases, to hide. I brought my findings to Chief Martinez, a no-nonsense woman who'd run the department for 12 years. "You're suggesting what, exactly?" she asked, looking at my map with its line of red pins. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But this isn't random. Something's taking these animals in a systematic way. Coyotes, maybe? They've been pushing into suburban areas more lately. Maybe, I said, though I didn't believe it. Coyotes didn't cause pets to claw through screens to get outside. They didn't move in perfect lines through town. And they certainly didn't take animals without leaving any trace. No blood, no fur, no remains. That night, I decided to do something unconventional. I set up surveillance in the area, where, if the pattern held, the next pet would disappear. It was a quiet residential street, all small houses with neat lawns. I parked my personal car, didn't want to spook whatever it was with a marked patrol vehicle, and waited. At 2:47 a.m. I saw it, or rather, I saw its effect. Every dog on the street started barking at once. House lights flicked on as owners tried to quiet their pets. Then, just as suddenly, the barking stopped. Complete silence. And in that silence, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low, thrumming sound, almost below the range of human hearing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I got out of my car, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw them. Cats. Maybe a dozen of them, all walking in the same direction, moving in perfect synchronization down the middle of the street. Their eyes were vacant, unfocused, like they were sleepwalking. I recognized one of them, Mr. Peterson's tabby, Thor, who'd been reported missing 2 days ago. He was thin, his fur matted, but he was alive. They all were. I followed them, keeping my distance. They moved with purpose, turning corners without hesitation, heading toward the old industrial district on the edge of town. The thrumming sound grew louder as we moved, and I realized it had a pattern to it, almost like a heartbeat or maybe a call. The cats led me to an abandoned warehouse that had been empty since the textile factory closed in the 90s. They slipped through a broken window, and I heard them join what sounded like dozens more animals inside. I called for backup, but static filled my radio. My cell phone showed no signal. The interference seemed to be coming from the warehouse itself. I should have waited. Should have gone back to my car, driven until I got signal, and returned with help. But I could hear animals in distress inside. Whimpering, meowing, sounds of fear and pain. I couldn't just leave them. I found a door that had been forced open recently. The rust on the hinges was disturbed, and there were fresh scratches on the frame. Inside, the warehouse was dark, but there was a strange phosphorescent glow coming from deeper in the building. The smell hit me first. Animal waste, fear, and something else. Something chemical and wrong. Like ozone mixed with rotting meat. I covered my nose with my sleeve and pressed forward. The main floor of the warehouse had been cleared, and in the center was something I still have trouble describing. It was a structure, maybe 10 feet tall, made of what looked like scavenged electronics, metal pipes, and organic material that might have been plant matter or something else entirely. It pulsed with that phosphorescent light, and the thrumming sound was definitely coming from it. Around this structure were the missing pets. Dozens of them. Cats, dogs, even a few rabbits and birds. They sat in perfect concentric circles, all facing the structure, all perfectly still. Their eyes reflected the strange light, making them look like tiny green lanterns in the darkness. But it was what was between the animals and the structure that made me reach for my weapon. It was a person. Or at least, it had been once. The figure was hunched over some kind of control panel jerry-rigged to the structure. They wore what might have been a hazmat suit once, but it was modified with additional tubing, wires, and patches of that same organic material. The suit's helmet was cracked, and through it I could see a face that was human but wrong. The features were distorted, stretched, with eyes that had developed a nictitating membrane like a cat's. The figure turned toward me, and I saw recognition in those terrible eyes. "Archibald," I said, barely able to believe it. Archibald Morse had been our town veterinarian until he disappeared 6 months ago. His practice had closed overnight, and he'd simply vanished. His family had filed a missing person report, but there had been no leads. Everyone assumed he'd had some kind of breakdown and left town. "Officer, Cray," he said, his voice distorted, like he was speaking through water. "You shouldn't be here, not time yet." "Archibald, what have you done?" "What is this?" He tilted his head, that membrane flicking across his eyes. "Calling them. Saving them. The change. It's coming. Only way. To preserve." "Preserve? Archibald, these are people's pets. You need to let them go." He laughed, a sound that was more animal than human. "Pets? No. No longer pets. Part of collective now, part of new ecosystem. When change comes, they survive. Adapt like I adapted." He gestured to himself, to his distorted features. 6 months, 6 months of preparation. The signal came from beyond, showed me what approaches, what humanity faces. Only those who adapt, survive. Signal? What signal? He pointed to the structure. It speaks to those who listen. Changes those who accept. Your pets, they heard call, came willingly, will be transformed, made ready. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. The animals were starting to stir, all turning their heads toward me in perfect unison. Their eyes were no longer vacant. There was an intelligence there, collective and alien. "Archibald, you're sick. You need help. Turn this thing off and come with me." "Off?" He laughed again. "Cannot turn off." Signal spreads, each night wider radius. Soon, whole town hears, then county, then state, then... He didn't need to finish. I understood the implication. "The disappearances in other towns," I said, remembering reports I'd seen from neighboring communities. "That's you? This signal?" "Not me. U.S. We are many now, veterinarians, animal control, those who work with beasts. We heard first, we understood, we prepare the way." My radio crackled to life suddenly, Chief Martinez's voice cutting through the static. "Zebediah, where the hell are you? Your GPS went dark an hour ago." The sound of normal human voice seemed to break whatever spell was on the animals. They scattered suddenly, running in all directions, flowing past me toward the exits. Archibald screamed, reaching out toward them, but they were beyond his control now. "No! Too soon! Not ready! The transformation incomplete." He lunged toward his control panel, and I had to make a choice. I fired my weapon, not at him, but at the structure. The bullets sparked against the metal and electronics, and something inside it shorted out. The phosphorescent glow flickered and died, and the thrumming sound cut off abruptly. Archibald collapsed, screaming. It wasn't pain, it was loss, like something had been ripped from his mind. He curled into a fetal position, sobbing. "You don't understand," he whimpered. "You don't know what's coming." They showed me, in the signal, what happens to Earth. The only way to survive, evolution, forced evolution. Backup arrived within minutes. The warehouse was secured, the strange structure dismantled and taken as evidence. Archibald was taken into custody, though he was catatonic by then, unresponsive to any stimuli. Most of the pets were recovered and returned to their owners, though many were malnourished and traumatized. Sebastian, Ophelia's cat, was among them. When I brought him back to her, she held him and cried. "He's different," she said quietly. "He looks at me like he knows something I don't." She was right. All the recovered animals were different. Quieter, more observant. They would sometimes stop what they were doing and stare at nothing. Heads tilted like they were listening to something only they could hear. The investigation that followed was unlike anything Brookhaven had ever seen. state and federal agencies descended on our small town, setting up a command center in the community center. The warehouse was cordoned off, men in hazmat suits carefully dismantling and cataloging every piece of Archibald's strange device. I was assigned as the local liaison, which meant I sat through countless debriefings, answered the same questions over and over, and watched as experts tried to make sense of what we'd found. Dr. Patricia Hendricks from the CDC was particularly interested in Archibald himself. His physical changes were unprecedented. The nictitating membranes, the elongated fingers that had developed small pads like a cat's paws, the way his pupils could dilate and contract independently. But it was the changes to his brain that were most disturbing. The MRI shows significant restructuring of the temporal lobe, she explained to Chief Martinez and me, pointing to areas on the scan that meant nothing to me but clearly troubled her. There are new neural pathways that shouldn't exist, connections between parts of the brain that aren't normally linked. It's like his brain has been rewired. To do what? Martinez asked. We're not sure. But these changes seem to allow him to perceive frequencies outside normal human range. He can hear sounds we can't, see light spectrums we can't. And there's something else. His brain shows activity in regions that are normally dormant. It's almost like he's using parts of the brain that evolution left behind. Archibald himself remained largely unresponsive, held in a secure medical facility. The few times he did speak, it was in fragments, talking about the signal and the coming convergence. The psychologist said it was delusional thinking brought on by whatever had altered his brain chemistry. But I wasn't so sure. Because the animals knew something. All the pets that had been exposed to Archibald's device were different. Their owners reported strange behaviors. Dogs that would stand at windows for hours, staring at the sky. Cats that would gather in groups, sitting in perfect circles. Birds that had changed their songs, creating new patterns that no one had heard before. Ophelia called me about a week after I'd returned Sebastian to her. Officer Cray, could you come by? Something's happening with Sebastian, and I don't know who else to call. I found her in her living room, watching Sebastian with a mixture of fascination and fear. The cat was sitting in front of her television, which was turned off, but he was reacting as if he was watching something. His head moved in precise patterns, his eyes tracking something invisible. He's been doing this for 3 days, Ophelia said. Always at the same time, 3:33 a.m. and 3:33 p.m., exactly 7 minutes each time. And Officer Cray, other cats have been coming to my window. They sit outside and do the same thing, all synchronized. I watched Sebastian, and there was definitely something unnatural about his movements. Too precise, too regular, like he was following a program. Has he shown any aggression? Any signs of illness? No, nothing like that. He eats normally, uses his litter box, even plays sometimes. But then these episodes happen, and his eyes. She paused, struggling to find the words. Sometimes when he looks at me, I swear there's something else looking back. Something that's studying me. I documented everything, added it to the growing file on what the federal agents were calling the Brookhaven incident. But they were focused on the technology, on understanding how Archibald had built his device. They weren't paying attention to the animals. That changed 3 weeks later when the second wave started. It began in Millfield, a town about 30 miles from Brookhaven. Their animal control officer, a man named Dennis Cutter, was found in an abandoned barn with a device almost identical to Archibald's. He showed the same physical changes, the membranes over his eyes, the altered hands, the rewired brain. But unlike Archibald, he was coherent when they found him. The signal is everywhere, he told investigators. In the earth, in the sky, in the spaces between atoms. we're just the first to hear it. The animals hear it naturally. We had to change ourselves to perceive it. But soon, everyone will hear. The frequency is adjusting, adapting to human perception. When that happens, the real changes begin. Then came reports from Riverside, 40 miles in the other direction. Then Plainsboro, then Cedar Falls. In each town, someone who worked with animals, veterinarians, animal control officers, pet groomers, had built similar devices, undergone similar changes. It was spreading, but not like a disease. These people hadn't had contact with each other. They'd all independently heard the signal and responded. The FBI brought in a specialist, Dr. Michael Reeves, who had a background in both neurology and radio astronomy. He was the first to propose what everyone else thought was impossible. "The signal isn't terrestrial," he said during a briefing I attended. "The frequency, the pattern, the way it interacts with biological neural networks, this is coming from outside our planet." The room erupted in arguments, but Reeves continued. "Look at the evidence. The devices these people built all use similar designs despite no communication between them. They all describe receiving the same information, images of Earth undergoing some kind of transformation, instructions on how to prepare. This isn't mass hysteria. They're receiving actual data from somewhere." "From where?" someone demanded. "That's what we need to find out." The investigation shifted focus. Radio telescopes were redirected, searching for the source of the signal. The devices were studied not as the products of delusional minds, but as potential receivers for extraterrestrial communication. And the animals continued to change. By mid-May, 6 weeks after the warehouse incident, Brookhaven had become ground zero for what the media was calling the pet phenomenon. Animals that had been exposed to Archibald's device were developing new behaviors daily. Dogs were working together in ways that suggested complex communication. Cats were creating patterns with objects, arranging toys, food, even leaves and twigs into geometric shapes that mathematicians said showed understanding of advanced concepts. But it was the birds that really got everyone's attention. It started with the crows. They began building something in Riverside Park, bringing materials from all over town: wire, electronic components, pieces of metal and plastic. At first, people tried to destroy what looked like a massive nest, but the crows rebuilt it within hours, and this time they defended it, working in coordinated groups to drive people away. I was called to the scene when the structure was about 6 feet tall. It bore an unsettling resemblance to Archibald's device, though cruder, built with beaks and claws rather than hands, and it was giving off a faint signal, not audible, but measurable with the right equipment. "They're building receivers, Doctor," Reeves said when he examined it, "naturally more sensitive to the signal, and now they're trying to amplify it." "For what purpose?" Chief Martinez asked. "Maybe the same purpose as Archibald and the others." "They're preparing for something." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Dennis Cutter had said, that the frequency was adjusting to human perception. What would happen when everyone could hear it? Would we all end up like Archibald, transformed into something no longer quite human? I decided to visit Archibald. The federal agents had moved him to a facility just outside town, and I used my liaison status to get access. I found him in a white room, sitting in a chair, staring at the wall. His transformation had progressed. His skin had developed a scaled texture in places, and his eyes now had vertical pupils like a cat's. "Archibald," I said, "it's Officer Cray." "Zebediah." His head turned toward me slowly. "Zebediah, you stopped me, stopped the preparation." "Preparation for what? What's coming?" He was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice that was barely human anymore. "Evolution, forced evolution. Earth is entering a new phase. The signal is the herald. Those who adapt survive. Those who resist, he trailed off. Who's sending the signal? Not who. What? The universe itself. Every world reaches this point, the moment when it must change or die. The signal shows the way. And the animals. They understand instinctively. No ego to resist, no conception of self to preserve. They accept the change. Humans, harder, must be prepared, must be shown. Shown what? He looked at me with those alien eyes. What we become. What we must become. The merger. Merger? Human and animal, mind and instinct, individual and collective. The boundaries dissolve, new form emerges, suited for what comes next. I wanted to dismiss it as madness, but the evidence was mounting. The coordinated behavior of the animals, the simultaneous emergence of people like Archibald across multiple towns, the signal that Dr. Reeves was tracking back to a source beyond our solar system. How long do we have? I asked. The signal strengthens. Each day, more hear it. When critical mass reached, transformation begins, willing or not. I left the facility deeply disturbed. If Archibald was right, if this signal was some kind of evolutionary trigger, what could we do to stop it? Should we even try to stop it? That question became more urgent the next day when Ophelia called me, hysterical. Sebastian's gone again, she said. But Officer Cray, this time he took things with him. I rushed to her apartment. She showed me Sebastian's collection, items he'd been gathering for days and hiding under her bed. Electronic components from old phones and computers, pieces of metal, wire, even some of her jewelry. I thought he was just being a cat, hoarding things. But look at this. She showed me a photo she'd taken that morning before Sebastian disappeared. The items weren't randomly collected. They were arranged in a pattern, a miniature version of the structure I'd seen in Archibald's warehouse. He's building something, she said. My cat is building something and I don't know what or why. We found Sebastian an hour later in the basement of Ophelia's building, along with 7 other cats from the neighborhood. They'd assembled the components into a small device that was humming with energy. When we approached, the cats didn't run. They sat in a circle around their creation, watching us with eyes that held too much intelligence. "What do we do?" Ophelia asked. Before I could answer, the device activated. A pulse of energy washed over us, and for just a moment I heard it, the signal. It wasn't sound exactly, more like information being downloaded directly into my brain. Images flashed through my mind. Earth from space, but different, evolved. Creatures that were neither fully human nor fully animal. A civilization that had transcended the boundaries between species. Then it was gone, leaving me gasping and disoriented. Ophelia was on her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Did you see it?" she whispered. "Did you see what we become?" I had. And part of me, a part that grew stronger every day, thought it was beautiful. The authorities confiscated the device the cats had built, but it was too late. People throughout Brookhaven were reporting similar experiences, brief connections to the signal, visions of transformation. Some were terrified. Others, like Ophelia, were beginning to wonder if resistance was wrong. "Maybe this is natural," she said to me a few days later. "Maybe this is just the next step in evolution, and we're fighting it because we're afraid of change." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't convinced. Natural evolution didn't involve signals from space and forced physical transformation. Or did it? How did we know this hadn't happened before, millions of years ago, pushing some species to evolve while others went extinct? The government response was predictable. They tried to contain it. Brookhaven was quietly quarantined, roadblocks set up to prevent people from leaving. They said it was a chemical spill, but everyone knew the truth. They were trying to stop the signal from spreading. But you can't quarantine radio waves, you can't stop animals from migrating, and you definitely can't stop people from changing when the change comes from within. By early June, the signal was getting stronger. People who had never shown any sensitivity were beginning to hear it. The transformations were accelerating too. 3 more people in Brookhaven had undergone physical changes similar to Archibald's, and they all said the same thing. This was voluntary. They had chosen to change because they'd seen what was coming. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything I observed. The changing behavior of animals, the increasing number of people reporting contact with the signal, the slow breakdown of the barrier between human and animal consciousness in our town. I wrote it all down, knowing that someday someone would need to understand what had happened here. But even as I documented the horror of it, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were witnessing something profound. Not an invasion or an attack, but an invitation, an opportunity to become something more than we were. The question was, would we accept it? And more importantly, did we actually have a choice? By mid-June, Brookhaven had become unrecognizable. Not physically, the buildings were the same, the streets unchanged, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The quarantine had been in effect for 3 weeks, and the isolation was taking its toll. Or maybe it was the signal that was changing everything. The animals no longer acted like animals. Dogs walked in formation down the streets, no leashes needed, their movements coordinated like a military unit. Cats gathered on rooftops at specific times, sitting in geometric patterns that shifted and reformed like living mandalas. Birds flew in formations that spelled out symbols none of us recognized, but all of us somehow understood. And the people were changing too, even those who hadn't undergone physical transformation. I noticed it first in myself. I would catch myself tilting my head at sounds others couldn't hear, my eyes tracking movement in empty air. My dreams were filled with images that weren't quite memories. Hunting through tall grass, the taste of raw meat, the comfort of pack unity. I would wake with my fingers curved like claws, my muscles tensed to pounce. Chief Martinez called a meeting of all essential personnel on June 18th. Only half showed up. The others had either fled before the quarantine, trying to escape whatever was happening, or had accepted the change, as Archibald called it. "We need to maintain order," Martinez said, though she looked exhausted, aged 10 years in the past 2 months. "Whatever this is, we're still responsible for protecting the citizens of Brookhaven." "Protect them from what?" asked Deputy Rogers. "From evolving? From becoming something better?" I looked at Rogers sharply. He'd always been a by-the-book cop, skeptical of anything unusual. But now his eyes had that distant look I'd seen in others who'd been touched by the signal. "We protect them from losing their humanity," Martinez said firmly. "What if humanity is just a stepping stone?" Rogers replied. "What if we're meant to become something more?" The meeting devolved into arguments, and I slipped out. I needed to check on Ophelia. She'd been calling less frequently, and when she did, she sounded different. I found her in her bookstore, but she wasn't alone. There were others with her. Maybe a dozen people, all sitting in a circle on the floor. In the center was Sebastian, but he looked different. His fur had taken on an almost iridescent quality, and his eyes were too human. "Zebediah," Ophelia said without looking up, "we've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" "You're going to be important," she said, finally meeting my gaze. Her pupils were dilated, but not from drugs. They were dilated like an animal's in the dark, adapted for different vision. The signal told us, You're a bridge. A bridge between what? Between what was and what will be. Between those who resist and those who accept. You have a foot in both worlds. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. I felt it too, the pull in both directions. The part of me that wanted to maintain order, to protect and serve as I'd sworn to do. And the other part, growing stronger each day, that wanted to surrender to the change, to become something new. Ophelia, this isn't right. People are scared. Families are being torn apart. Growing pains, said another voice. I turned to see Archibald entering the store. But he wasn't in custody. He was free, walking casually despite his transformed appearance. All evolution involves loss. The caterpillar must die for the butterfly to emerge. How are you here? I demanded, reaching for my weapon. The facility couldn't hold me once I completed the change, he said simply. Walls mean nothing when you can perceive dimensions humans can't. But I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to help with the transition. What transition? Tonight, Ophelia said. The signal reaches critical mass tonight. At 3:33 a.m., the frequency will achieve resonance with human consciousness. Everyone will hear it. Everyone will see what we've seen. And then? Then we choose, Archibald said. Accept the evolution or resist it. But resistance will be futile. The change is inevitable. The only choice is whether we guide it or let it happen chaotically. I left the bookstore feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. If they were right, if tonight everyone would be exposed to the signal, what would happen to our town? To the world? I tried calling the state police, the FBI, anyone who might listen. But the phone lines were down. The internet had been cut 3 days ago. We were completely isolated. As night fell, I could feel the tension in the air. Animals were gathering in the streets, not just pets, but wild animals too. Deer from the forests, raccoons, opossums, even a few coyotes. They showed no fear of humans or each other. They were all waiting. At midnight, I was parked on Main Street watching. Other officers were at their posts, but I could tell from their radio chatter that they felt it too. The building pressure like the air before a thunderstorm. At 1 a.m., the animals began to move. They formed into groups, each species separate but coordinated. They took positions throughout town like they were preparing for something. At 2 a.m., people started coming out of their houses, not everyone, but many. They walked slowly, purposefully, their eyes unfocused. They joined the animals in the streets, standing among them without fear. At 3 a.m., I felt it begin, a vibration in my bones, in my teeth, in the very air around me. The signal was building, strengthening, preparing for something. At 3:32 a.m., I got out of my car. I couldn't help it. The pull was too strong. I walked to the center of town, where hundreds of people and animals had gathered in the square. Ophelia was there, and Archibald, and many others I recognized despite their varying degrees of transformation. At 3:33 a.m. it happened. The signal exploded through our consciousness like a tsunami of information. Every human in Brookhaven, possibly the world, was suddenly connected. I could feel everyone's thoughts, their fears, their wonder. But more than that, I could feel the animals too. Their simpler but deeper understanding, their acceptance of change, their lack of ego fighting against transformation. And I saw what we were being offered. It wasn't death or replacement. It was synthesis. Human intelligence combined with animal instinct. Individual consciousness networked into something greater. We would keep our memories, our personalities, but we would also gain so much more. Enhanced senses, new forms of perception, the ability to communicate without words, to understand the natural world in ways we never could before, but we would also lose things. the rigid boundaries of self, the illusion of separation from nature, the comfortable lie that humans were somehow apart from and above the animal kingdom. The vision lasted only moments, but it felt like hours. When it ended, I was on my knees in the square, gasping. Around me, others were having similar reactions. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were screaming. "Now you understand," Archibald said, his transformed features serene. "This isn't an invasion. It's an invitation. Earth itself is evolving, and we can either evolve with it or be left behind." "But why?" I managed to ask. "Why now?" "Because something is coming," Ophelia said. "The signal isn't just offering evolution, it's warning us. In 5 years, maybe 10, Earth will face something that humans as we are cannot survive. But what we become, we might have a chance. What's coming? We don't know exactly. The signal only shows fragments. Environmental collapse, possibly. Or contact with something from beyond Earth. Or maybe just the next stage in planetary evolution. But whatever it is, we need to be ready." Over the next hours, the town divided. About half the population chose to accept the change. They gathered with Archibald and the others who had already transformed, beginning the process of guided evolution. The transformation was gradual for most. Not the dramatic physical changes Archibald had undergone, but subtle shifts, enhanced senses, new neural pathways, a growing connection to the collective consciousness forming. The other half resisted. They barricaded themselves in their homes, covered their ears, tried to block out the signal that now pulsed continuously through the air. But I could see the strain on their faces. Fighting the signal was exhausting, and I didn't know how long they could maintain their resistance. Chief Martinez was among the resistors. I found her at the police station, surrounded by signal-blocking equipment the federal agents had left behind. "This is our duty, Zebediah," she said, "to protect humanity, even from itself. But what if Archibald's right? What if this is the only way to survive what's coming? Then we survive as humans, or not at all," she said firmly. But I could see the doubt in her eyes, the exhaustion from fighting the signal's pull. I stood between the two groups, unable to fully commit to either. I spent the next days documenting everything, interviewing people on both sides, trying to understand what was happening to our species. Those who accepted the change reported incredible experiences. They could communicate with animals, understanding them on a level that went beyond training or conditioning. They could sense things humans normally couldn't: electromagnetic fields, pheromone messages, ultrasonic vibrations. Some developed physical adaptations, better night vision, enhanced hearing, improved reflexes. But they also reported losing things. The sharp edges of individual identity began to blur. They found it harder to think in terms of I and easier to think in terms of we. Some forgot their names for hours at a time, existing simply as part of the collective. Those who resisted faced their own challenges. The signal was constant now, and blocking it required continuous effort. Many developed severe headaches, insomnia, paranoia. Some broke down completely, their minds snapping under the strain. And there were physical effects too. Those who resisted too strongly began to weaken, as if their bodies were rejecting them for refusing to evolve. By the end of June, the quarantine had collapsed. The military pulled out when half their soldiers accepted the change. The scientists packed up their equipment and fled. Brookhaven was abandoned by the outside world, left to undergo its transformation alone. Or so we thought. On July 1st, we received a transmission. Not the signal. This was a human broadcast coming from a city 200 miles away. "Brookhaven, if anyone can hear this, you're not alone. The change is happening everywhere. Every major city, every small town. The whole world is hearing the signal now. Some places are accepting it. Others are fighting. A few have found a middle way. If you can respond, please, we need to share information. We need to understand what's happening to us. I looked at the radio, then at Chief Martinez, who had been listening with me. Her resistance was weakening. I could see it in the way her pupils dilated when the signal pulsed stronger. Should we respond? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment, then, yes. Tell them. Tell them Brookhaven is still here, still human, still. She paused, unable to finish the lie. Because the truth was, none of us were still fully human. Not anymore. The change had begun the moment the signal arrived, and fighting it was only delaying the inevitable. The question now wasn't whether we would evolve. It was how we would evolve, guided and purposeful, or chaotic and traumatic, and whether whatever we became would be enough to face what was coming. 6 months have passed since that night when the signal reached critical mass. I'm still in Brookhaven, still technically Officer Zebediah Cray, though the concept of law enforcement has become almost meaningless in our transformed town. I never fully accepted the change, but I never fully resisted either. I exist in a strange middle ground, human enough to remember what we were, changed enough to understand what we're becoming. It makes me useful as a translator between the two groups that still exist here, those who've embraced transformation and those still fighting it. The town has divided itself geographically. The north side, near the old industrial district, is where the fully transformed live. If you can call it living. They move in perfect synchronization, communicate without words, and work on projects that seem to have no human purpose. They're building something in the warehouse where I first found Archibald. A massive structure that grows more complex each day. The south side houses the resistors, maybe 30 people now, down from over 100. They've fortified the community center, lined it with lead and copper mesh to dampen the signal. Chief Martinez leads them, though she's aged terribly. Fighting the signal every moment of every day has taken its toll. Her hair has gone completely white. Her hands shake constantly, and sometimes she forgets where she is. I live in the middle, in my small apartment on Main Street, documenting everything. I've filled dozens of notebooks, taken hundreds of photographs, recorded hours of video. Someone needs to witness this. Someone needs to remember. Ophelia visits me sometimes. She's transformed, but not like Archibald. She kept more of her humanity, or maybe found a way to blend both states. Her eyes have the vertical pupils now, and her fingers have developed small, retractable claws. But she still reads books, still laughs at old jokes, still cries when she remembers what we've lost. The resistance is killing them, she told me yesterday, looking toward the community center. Martinez won't last another month. Her body is rejecting itself. And the transformation? Is that any better? She was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Sebastian, who barely looked like a cat anymore. His fur had developed a scaled texture, and his paws had become more like hands. "It's different," she finally said. "We're not human anymore, but we're not dead either. We're something else, something that might survive what's coming. You still won't tell me what that is, because we don't fully know. The signal shows fragments, possibilities. Environmental collapse is part of it. The climate reaching a tipping point where traditional human biology can't survive. But there's something else. Visitors, maybe, or an awakening of something that's been dormant on Earth. The signal isn't clear. That night, I was awakened by screaming from the community center. I ran there to find chaos. Half the resistors had suddenly stopped fighting, overwhelmed by the signal all at once. They were transforming rapidly, too rapidly, their bodies trying to make months of changes in minutes. Martinez was on the floor, convulsing. Her body was fighting itself. One arm had developed scales while the other remained human. One eye had gone vertical while the other stayed round. She was screaming, but the sound kept changing. Sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes something else entirely. "Help her!" someone shouted at me. But there was nothing I could do. She'd resisted too long, fought too hard. Her body couldn't handle the sudden change. She died just before dawn, neither human nor transformed, caught between two states of being. 7 others died with her. The remaining resistors, seeing what had happened, finally stopped fighting. They let the signal in, accepting the gradual transformation rather than risk a violent one. By the end of July, there were no fully human people left in Brookhaven. Even I had changed more than I wanted to admit. My hearing had expanded into ultrasonic ranges. My night vision had improved dramatically. Sometimes I found myself thinking in patterns that weren't quite human, seeing connections that normal human cognition couldn't make. The outside world had gone quiet. The last radio transmission we received was 3 weeks ago. A military broadcast warning all citizens to remain in their homes, that the biological anomaly was being contained. Then nothing. But we could feel them out there. Others like us, transforming or resisting in their own isolated pockets. The signal had created a kind of network, a loose connection between all affected areas. We could sense their emotions, their struggles, their victories and defeats. In August, Archibald made an announcement. The construction in the warehouse was complete. It was time for the next phase. I went to see what they'd built. The structure was 30 feet tall now, a combination of organic and technological components that hurt to look at directly. It pulsed with energy, not just the signal, but something else, something that seemed to bend space around it. "It's a beacon," Archibald explained, though his voice was barely recognizable as speech anymore, "and a gateway. When activated, it will call them." "Call who?" "The ones who sent the signal. Our predecessors, the ones who have been through this before." "This has happened before?" "Many times, on many worlds. Evolution isn't random, Zebediah, it's guided. When a species reaches a certain point, when their planet faces certain challenges, the signal comes. Those who answer it survive, those who don't." He gestured to the empty streets. "They become history. And you're going to activate this beacon? Invite these things here? Not things. Teachers, guides. They'll show us how to complete the transformation, how to use our new abilities, how to survive what's coming." I wanted to argue, to stop him, but I knew it was pointless. The transformation had progressed too far. Brookhaven wasn't human anymore. We were something in between, and we needed to become something complete or we'd die like Martinez, caught between two states. The beacon was activated on August 15th at 3:33 a.m. Always that time, always that significance. The entire town gathered at the warehouse. Even those who'd resisted until recently came, drawn by instinct or curiosity or resignation. When Archibald threw the switch, the world changed. The beacon sent out a pulse that I felt in every cell of my body. It traveled through the signal network, reaching every transformed being on the planet. And something answered. They came through the gateway, not physically, not at first, but as presences, consciousnesses that had once been like us. I could feel their history, their own transformation centuries or millennia ago, on a world whose name I couldn't pronounce. They'd faced the same choice we had, and they'd survived by becoming something new. They spoke to us not in words but in direct understanding. They showed us what we were becoming. Not human-animal hybrids, but something more fundamental. We were returning to a state that preceded the artificial division between human and nature, rebuilding the connection that civilization had severed. The physical changes were just the beginning. Our consciousness was expanding, connecting not just to each other but to the living systems of Earth itself. We could feel the forests breathing, the oceans pulsing, the slow thoughts of mountains. We were becoming part of the planet's immune system, its conscious response to the damage that pure human civilization had caused. But what about those who refuse? I asked, thinking of the billions of humans who might still be resisting. The answer came in images rather than words. Some would accept the change late, like our resistors had. Others would fade, their biology unable to adapt to the changing world. But some would find a third way, remaining human but allied with the transformed, two species working together. It wasn't the extinction of humanity, it was its bifurcation, two paths forward instead of one. The presences stayed for 3 days, teaching, guiding, showing us how to use abilities we didn't know we had. Then they left, their duty done, returning to wherever transformed beings go when their world no longer needs them. Brookhaven was different after they left, calmer, more purposeful. The transformed began working on projects I couldn't fully understand. Something about repairing damaged ecosystems, preparing safe zones for the climate chaos that was coming. And I finally made my choice. I didn't fully transform. I couldn't let go of my humanity completely. But I accepted the partial change, becoming what Ophelia called a bridge. Human enough to communicate with any remaining pure humans, changed enough to understand and work with the transformed. There are others like me now, scattered across the world. We're the translators, the go-betweens, helping both sides understand that this isn't about conquest or replacement. It's about survival, about evolution, about preparing for a future that neither pure humans nor transformed beings could face alone. I still live in my apartment on Main Street. I still document everything. But now, I also serve as a liaison, helping newly transforming communities understand what's happening, helping resistors see that they have options. Ophelia runs a school now, teaching young transformed beings how to balance their dual nature. Sebastian assists her, his intelligence having grown to near human levels. Sometimes I watch them work and wonder if this is what pets were always meant to become. Not our possessions, but our partners. Archibald has become something I can barely recognize as once being human. He spends most of his time at the beacon, monitoring signals from space, preparing for the next phase. He says more changes are coming, that this is just the beginning of Earth's transformation. The government tried to retake Brookhaven once, sending in troops in hazmat suits. But the moment they entered the town, they heard the signal. Half of them transformed within days. The other half fled and never came back. We're not contagious in the traditional sense. The signal isn't a disease. But once you've heard it, really heard it, you can't unhear it. It becomes part of you, calling you to evolve or calling you to resist, but always there, always present. Sometimes I think about that first call, about Ophelia worried about her missing cat. Such a small thing that led to something so enormous. If I hadn't responded, if I hadn't found Archibald's warehouse, would any of this have happened? Or would it have happened anyway, just differently, more chaotically? I'll never know. All I know is that the world has changed, is changing, will continue to change. The missing pets were just the beginning, the first sign of a transformation that may take generations to complete. Some nights, when the signal is particularly strong, I can feel the entire network of transformed consciousness. Millions of beings, no longer quite human, no longer quite animal, but something new. Something that might just survive the challenges ahead. And on those nights I write, I document, I bear witness, because someone needs to remember what we were, even as we become what we must be. The investigation that started with missing pets has become the investigation of humanity's future. And the strangest part? The most disturbing realization? I think we're going to make it. Changed, transformed, no longer recognizable as the species we once were, but alive, adapted, evolved. The signal still pulses through Brookhaven, through the world. It no longer sounds alien to me. It sounds like home, like the future, like hope. But I still remember the fear in Ophelia's voice that first day, worried about Sebastian. I remember the terror of finding Archibald in that warehouse. I remember the horror of watching Martinez die, caught between two states of being. That fear, that horror, they were real, they were valid. This transformation, necessary or not, came at a terrible cost. We lost our humanity to save our existence. Whether that trade was worth it, I suppose only time will tell. For now, I continue my work, documenting, translating, bridging two worlds that were once one and might be again. Officer Zebediah Cray, the last human cop in a town that's no longer quite human. Investigating a future that's no longer quite recognizable, but still here, still watching, still recording everything, so that someday someone might understand what happened when the pets went missing and the world began to change.